Welcome to the Canadian Nurses Association's first Anti-Indigenous Racism Knowledge Sharing event. My name is Valerie Gerdisa. I'm the CEO of the Canadian Nurses Association, and I'm very grateful to be here with you all today for this important event. Before we begin, it is my honor and privilege to introduce Elder Darlene McIntosh to open us up in a good way. Elder Darlene is the member of the Lheidli T'enneh Nation in British Columbia, a member of the nation's Elder Society, cultural advisor at the College of New Caledonia, author and chancellor of the University of Northern British Columbia. We are so grateful for your wisdom and presence today, Elder Darlene. Over to you.
Howdy. Bandada Hunzu, good morning. I'm coming from the beautiful city of Prince George, British Columbia, where we have a rainy, overcast day, but yet in our hearts, we're ready to participate in this great webinar. And 477 people joining us across Canada. That is absolutely incredible. And it looks like the number keeps on going up, so all the better. So what a wonderful gathering we're having, a wonderful event on the Canadian Nurses Association who's putting this on. Thank you, Hillary, for all the hard work, and thank you to your team that actually has done such a wonderful job. Good for you. So we are dealing with anti-Indigenous racism, knowing, sharing events. And I'm sure as everybody gathers together that there will be a lot happening. We're starting our first day here at the college with Truth and Reconciliation. We're all wearing orange and having an event here, which will start our week off. Tomorrow we'll go to the park and we'll celebrate Truth and Reconciliation and Orange Shirt Day, which is so very pivotal in the movement for positive change. So in saying that, I want you to take a nice deep cleansing breath throughout your whole body. Nice deep cleansing breath. We breathe into our body, we connect to a deeper level of ourselves. And no matter where you are in Canada, if you stood outside early this morning, 4:30-ish, in that time frame, and you stood in the east direction, facing the east, and we take that deep breath all the way into our body, and we feel that breath going all the way down into our feet, and we feel our feet sink into the deep, rich soil of Mother Earth. We smell the richness of her soil. We can feel it between our toes. And there she grounds us into the day. And then as the sun comes up, as it always does in the east direction, you can feel the warmth of the sun in your face, on your body. You take another deep breath, absorbing all the energies that the sun gives you. And you feel the wind brushing your face and your body. And you listen. What is the wind saying to you? And at this moment in time, you're at that peaceful feeling where you just let everything go. And you focus on your self-care, looking after yourself. Because that's how we want to start the day. Every day when the sun comes up in the east direction, it gives you a new day, new possibilities, and a new beginning. You have a clean slate to decide exactly what your day is going to unfold to. And with a smile on your face, you're feeling good. And then when you come into your job or whatever you're going to be going into after, you have that smile on your face. And that smile on your face is very contagious. When you smile at somebody, they usually reciprocate and smile back at you. And that's how we need to live our life, in a place of peace, a place of gratitude. So we call on the Creator, whatever name that you give your Creator, the grandfathers and grandmothers and all of our ancestors to come be with us today. We thank you for this beautiful day on Mother Earth, creating a space for truth and reconciliation on how to address anti-Indigenous racism within our healthcare system. How do we create a more equitable and culturally safe healthcare environment? As we go into this very important work, we thank all of you for participating in this event. Thank you for all the knowledge and wisdom that will be shared. We come together to witness what changes can be made as we come as a collective. The story unveiled will help shape the outcome of our future, helping to understand the 7 generations of the past so that the 7 generations of the future will benefit. Stand and continue to stand with children, youth, adults, and of course our beautiful elders as we address the inequalities in First Nations, Inuit and Métis people, so they can grow up healthy, strong, and proud. Our children are our future leaders. Truth and reconciliation is a powerful symbol we hold for our Indigenous people. As the waves bring a change of weather, they also bring a change on how to do best practices, focusing on how to support our First Nations communities. They are ready to engage and share knowledge on supporting our Indigenous people who represent the best of who we are. It is our sacred obligation giving Indigenous voices on reconciliation for our people. As we speak our truth, which addresses our inner being, speaking our truth through Indigenous culture, drumming, connecting with the beat of our mother's heart, singing and dancing, connecting to the spirit of the land. We thank Creator for being with us today as we launch this day as a new beginning with new possibilities and a new day as we move forward, erasing the inadequacies of the past, present, and future. As the sun is high in the sky, warming us in the coolness of the northern energy, it touches our spirit, asking us to come into the wisdom of our hearts. We thank Mother Earth for allowing us to walk softly on her, leaving no footprints. You know, all those present, go home and knowing what you're going to receive today will benefit all. Creator, hear our prayers. Creator, hear our prayers. All my relations, I see. Thank you.
Thank you, Elder Darlene. As we gather today, it is important that I position myself appropriately and would like to take a moment to acknowledge the privilege I hold as a white woman of settler origin and beneficiary of colonization. I recognize that hosting this knowledge sharing event as someone who benefits from colonial systems, that I am not the expert. I, like most of the attendees here today, am present with an open mind and heart to listen and learn and unlearn. Together, as we approach the 10th anniversary of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, I hope we can amplify the voices of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leaders and humbly work towards building a more equitable and culturally safe health system. Thank you for allowing me to be part of today's important dialogue. I would like to start by saying a huge thank you to the College of Registered Nurses of Saskatchewan, the British Columbia College of Registered Nurses and Midwives, the Canadian Association for Rural and Remote Nursing, and TD Assurance for sponsoring this event. I would also like to take this time to run through a few housekeeping items. Please use the Q&A function on Zoom for all technical support questions and any questions for speakers during the event. A CNA staff member will respond as soon as possible. For the interactivity near the end of the event, we will be using the platform Mentimeter to engage with you. At that time, you will be prompted to scan a QR code to be able to participate. Click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your Zoom bar to access the French stream, which includes translated live audio and captions. Also, to note, today's session will be recorded and available for access at a later date on CNA's website and through our YouTube channel. We will send out email correspondence once this is accessible. Lastly, I want to acknowledge this can be a difficult morning and afternoon, as the content may bring up difficult feelings or memories. We encourage you to step away as needed and please access as needed mental health resources, which are also posted on the CNA Zoom event page. You should see some links coming into the chat now. Before we proceed to the event, I would like to share with you CNA's land acknowledgement. In Canada, we live, learn, and work on traditional Indigenous territories. We are all direct beneficiaries of policies of expulsion and assimilation of Indigenous peoples during and since the time of settlement and confederation. CNA acknowledges that the land upon which each of us is joining this meeting is and continues to be the home of diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. This acknowledgement is made with the recognition that all nurses have a responsibility to learn the harsh and devastating impact that colonization has had on Indigenous peoples, past and present. Far too long, the burden of leading systemic change has been on the back of Indigenous nurses, and it must be understood that that is the mandate of all nurses to uphold the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We must do the work. I would like to now take the time to introduce Mary Lee Naujicic to share some opening remarks on behalf of the Canadian Indigenous Nurses Association. Mary Lee is a member of the Eagle Clan from Fort William First Nations near Thunder Bay and a member of the Robinson Superior Treaty region. Mary Lee is currently seen as Chief Executive Officer and has contributed significantly to the planning of this event. Thank you, and over to you, Mary Lee.
Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, I've got multiple screens going on here. It is so great to be with you here today, and I'm with you on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, otherwise known as Ottawa, our national capital region. It is an honor to be sharing this time in this webinar with the Canadian Nurses Association, and I'm so glad that they invited us to the table. As they indicated, I'm originally from Fort William First Nation near Thunder Bay, and I'm of the Eagle Clan. I am the daughter of Deanna McLaurin, now Gessick. Having said that, this is an interesting time for all healthcare professionals, and that is why CINA has welcomed the opportunity to work with CNA to address anti-Indigenous racism and the harms and effects that can be done, can be undone, and should be done. Those are three very different levels of how we want to be able to help you in this webinar today. It's a matter of how do we help you unlearn? How do we help you identify the pathways and the steps that are going to be necessary in your journey? Whether you're doing this for the first time or you've been in part of Indigenous engagement previously, at CINA, we see this as an opportunity for all nations and our non-Indigenous partners and allies to become part of a very meaningful change in our pattern, in our environment, and in the way we think. Through the Canadian Indigenous Nurses Association, we have accepted the challenge to work with our allies and non-Indigenous partners. As many of you have probably heard me say, the TRC's calls to action is not an Indigenous responsibility. Rather, it is an opportunity for non-Indigenous partners to come to the table, to be prepared to address the truth, and to respond to the reconciliation. Many times, and probably because just the nature of who I am, I have memorized many of the calls to actions. We are not only focusing on numbers 18 to 24, but we're looking at other areas within those calls to actions that impact on your journey as you prepare for your commitment towards reconciliation, like number 7 and number 10, employment and education. To having all of the members at the table, understanding what is being put on the table as far as the education platforms, the curriculum. How do we need to change it? How do we need to modify it so that it has Indigenous history and the Indigenous lens applied to it? Furthermore, having said that, and probably a very onerous task on our side, is the attestation of that content. We don't want to provide misinformation. We want to provide you with information to making an informed decision on how you will participate, how you will engage, and how you will maintain your commitment towards your reconciliation. Reconciliation will be a much longer task than what it took for us to get to the truth. It has now been 10 years since the TRC's calls to action were brought to the table to the Canadian domain. We have seen very little movement on that side. At CINA, we are hopeful to work with our healthcare partners, stakeholders, and/or agencies to help you address how you want to address your commitment. How do you want to put out your report card? What is it that you're comfortable with putting out in the public domain? While we recognize that many of you are unsure, the first step in your engagement is your humility. There is nothing wrong with that, and that's a good place to start. What we would like to also look at is number 57, a training and skills opportunity like the one that's being designed for you by CNA here today. We want to be able to incorporate all of those activities as part of your strategic or corporate vision. How will you monitor it? How will you track it? And furthermore, how will you share the data collected from your respective organizations so that we can help you in writing your, get it, 500-year work plan. Yes, it's not a glitch. I did say 500 years. As we as Indigenous people work towards 7 generations, that's our 500-year work plan. Today, we lay the foundation for what that reconciliation is going to look like with our partners. At CINA, we have opened the doors to our membership and have included non-Indigenous healthcare partners and providers to become part of the lesson in your journey towards understanding and towards reconciliation. We look forward to helping you lay the foundation for the generations that are yet to come. We look forward to what it is that you will address. Let me remind you that this is not just a one-time opportunity. Once you commit, you're in it for the long haul. It will be fun. It will be difficult. It will be emotional. But it is all those challenges that we will accept together as part of our learning, our growth, and our expansion, not only as healthcare professionals, but to all the nations that we represent. Having said that, we also look forward to our work with the Canadian Nurses Association, and they are cognitive of the fact that they do not have the voice for the Indigenous nurses, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis from coast to coast to coast. That is why they have opened their door to include the engagement and collaboration of the Canadian Indigenous Nurses Association to this table. We welcome the opportunity to work with the Canadian Nurses Association and look forward to the new path and the journey that they've established as part of their strategic vision as they move forward. Like I said, it is an exciting time and one that I am truly looking forward to working with you on. If you ever have doubts and you're just not sure and you want to get that Indigenous voice, please feel free to reach out to the Canadian Indigenous Nurses Association will help you with directing you on that path, providing you with some advice and or suggestions on a recommended journey that works for you. There is no time space. There is no deadline. There is no right or wrong. It's about learning. It's about being engaged. It's about here and now. Thank you again to CNA, the staff, the team, and all of those who put together this webinar. I truly am looking forward to your engagement here today. Miigwech.
Thank you, Mary Lee, for your words of wisdom, your contributions to this event, and for our highly valued partnership. We are very grateful for your wisdom, guidance, and support at CNA. I would like to now hand it over to Beverly Hunter. Beverly is currently the Regional Elders Coordinator for Nunatsiavut government and is originally from Nain, Nunatsiavut. Today, she will help situate us and will guide participants through the veil exercise. Over to you, Beverly.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank everyone. Thank you, Hillary, for this opportunity. I always say that it's so important for everyone, not just Indigenous peoples, to know the background of our people. And I also wanted to let you know that this story is not of someone in particular. It's just a story that we know of. It hits close to home as Indigenous peoples. So, and I also want to say that this is not my work. This is the work of Dr. Joe Salanto. He gave me the permission to use this when I could. So thank you to Dr. Joe Salanto as well. And this activity is going to be short, but it will also be a bit heavy. So I'm hoping you will take what you need to at this time. So I will begin because I only had a few minutes. So this is called Bonnie's story. And it's the story of her people. Bonnie's ancestors were a happy, proud, and resourceful people who lived for centuries in a balanced way on their lands. Following the coming of the European settlers, Bonnie's great-grandparents were removed from their homelands and prohibited from hunting, fishing, and trapping in the ways that their people had always done. Alcohol was introduced by the settlers and traders and quickly became a way of numbing the pain of all the losses and from their growing sense of helplessness. Bonnie's grandparents were removed from their homes as young children and placed in a residential school where they were prohibited from speaking their language and from practicing their traditions. They were called savages and heathens and were converted to Christianity and told that they needed to learn the white man's way. When they returned home several years later, they found that they were strangers in their own community that was now struggling with widespread alcohol abuse and other problems. Because of the breakdown of their culture, Bonnie's parents grew up in alcoholic and abusive homes. Unemployed, poverty, food shortages, health problems, violence, accidents, and suicides were among the many painful realities facing their community. Like so many others, her parents turned to alcohol and drugs to numb the pain. Bonnie is born. Bonnie's parents argue frequently and finally separate as mother becomes sober and father becomes more violent. He is imprisoned as a result of some violent episodes when intoxicated. Bonnie, aged 3 to 10. Bonnie's mother does her best as a single parent. She works 2 part-time jobs, looks after her aging parents, and maintains her sobriety. But she does not have much time or energy to devote to Bonnie. Bonnie begins drinking at the age of between 10 and 14 with her friends. She stays out late at night and sometimes doesn't come home until morning. She is less interested in school each year. Her mother is torn between the demands of her jobs and the growing challenges of parenting Bonnie. Bonnie's father is released from prison, seems committed to sobriety, and her parents are attempting to reunite. Age 14 to 16. Bonnie seems to be drawn to abusive boyfriends and becomes pregnant, but following an intense argument with her boyfriend, miscarries at 3 months. She drops out of school and is drinking more heavily, using marijuana and sometimes taking pills to sleep. Her parents are very concerned about her and frequently pleads with her to stop drinking and drugging. Age 17. Over the last several years, 2 cousins and several friends have died by suicide. After her boyfriend breaks up with her, Bonnie is staring at a bottle of pills, wondering if that will be a solution for her. So this is Bonnie as we see her at the age of 17. And the question now is, how can we start removing the veils in a safe way moving forward? Nakumik, thank you.
Thank you, Beverly, for helping to set the context for us while leading us through that emotional and powerful exercise. We are very grateful for your presence today and very moved by the veil exercise. It is now my honor to introduce to you 3 of Indigenous research chairs in nursing. Dr. Lisa Borick-Bearskin of Beaver Lake Cree Nation in Treaty 6, Dr. Wanda Phillips-Beck of Hollow Water First Nation, Manitoba, and Dr. Holly Graham of Thunderchild First Nation, Saskatchewan. The Indigenous Research Chair in Nursing Initiative supports the development of best practices in nursing to improve the health of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples in Canada. We are very grateful for you taking the time today to highlight the essential work of Indigenous nurse leaders like yourselves who have and continue to lead the way towards essential systemic change. Lisa, we will hand it over to you to begin.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment the power of lived experience lives in each one of us. And there's so many people like Bonnie. As nurses, we probably see individuals every day. Our students come to our classroom. Our future leaders carry those stories. And paying attention to something to my body, and my heart is still racing. Because I can't say I know I had those stories inscripted into my personhood. And so taking this time to rewrite history, to return to who Bonnie was originally, and honoring that work that we do as nurses and the people that we come and engage with every single day. And I want to just say Danse to wow, no demtuk, mio kisipiao, and anas kumtano, wago maganak. And anas kumtin kuta kisaka ekwa pamatsawen ekwa. Mina kinona damten kakisko dawinan. I just want to say hello, everyone. I want to acknowledge our two speakers before us for starting us off in such a powerful way to give truth to my experience as an Indigenous nurse, as an Indigenous mother, as an Indigenous child. I'm grateful for the education that I've learned from some of our old ones. And some of our new ones who continue to teach me how to be better, how to be more mindful. How do we collectively come together to help change and transform and acknowledge and move toward reconciliation? I think it's at the heart of the foundation of this country. that I come to you today as Mona Lisa Burke-Bearskin, Nasigo son, Amasquasagigan, come to you today as a name that I've owned and developed over the years in relation to every social context I've lived in, which is why I find it humorous that I have so many different names for people who actually know me. But yeah, I'm grateful that we can do this work. I'm grateful that we can try to move beyond just talking about inequity. I'm glad to move beyond and talking about what performative benevolence looks like in nursing. And so on to the next slide, you can see here this group of nurses here. I think I can speak for all of us. The work that we do is because of our First Nations and our Inuit and Métis populations and the people that we serve. And when I think about particularly the Inuit, it's the only healthcare system that is actually a referral system to try to access healthcare in that region is unbelievable. And the support for our Indigenous nurses in that area, while people come to learn about their role in genocide, is so important. And so I think, I was reminded here today, everything I do is because of the people, is because of my family. It's because of where I come from, Beaver Lake Cree Nation, a small northern community north of Edmonton, where we don't have access now to hunting and fishing and our medicines, and we're learning our languages. So I just feel very honored that I could sit here and represent who I am, where I come from, and what I hope to contribute to nursing. On to the next slide. And it's really carrying this history and the stories. We're really trying to build on a legacy. And as I mentioned, rewriting history, recognizing some of our first nursing leaders, Edith Montour, Rose Casper, Jean Cut, and some of our more current nurses. And I want to ask everyone to keep them in their prayers. Dr. Madeline Dion Stout, Dr. Evelyn Voyager, Rose Miller, Marilyn Van Bibber. They're all getting up there in age. I've been so grateful to be mentored by them. So I want to do everything I can to support the recognition of Indigenous Nurses Day on April 10th. And that will be a lasting contribution that I think the new generation will carry onto the new slide. As you can see here, there's so many more we've had the privilege to work with. Each one of the chairs here, we have our own relationships, and I think that's really important. That's where change happens, is in that collaboration. I think we've heard that from them over and over the years. So it's so important that we acknowledge these individuals that have come before us. On to the next slide. And as I mentioned, our new generation of scholars, we talked about earlier, the 7 generations that we have to be mindful of. And this is our future, and they're going to continue. And they're in something I've learned so important from them is they've given me the language around racism. I think in my early years of nursing in the early 80s, we never got to talk about systemic racism. We experienced it. We felt it. I knew it was happening. I didn't know how. I had to spend, as Marilee said, a long time confronting it and going through my own impact of colonization. And I think we all need to do that, and we've heard that collective story again. So I just want to acknowledge these individuals, part of our Indigenous Research Chair. Again, you'll hear a little bit more as they go into it. On to the next slide. And so one of the exciting initiatives, it's taken a long time coming, but we've been advocating, our trailblazers have been advocating for research leads. One of the interesting things I think about nursing is when you think about the number of nurses who are researchers, there's more nurse researchers than any other healthcare profession. And so that's some of the evidence that we're trying to move forward and help inform. Cozen's work, research informs all of that work. Research is informing policy. Research is informing clinical practice, education. Research is, the work that I do is Indigenous research methodology. It's transforming who I am as a person and my connection to community. And it's been a privilege and honor to, work in this chair to advance the voices that we haven't heard about. On to the next slide. And so under this, very intentional and purposeful relationship that we came together under these chairs was built on this framework of respect, relationality, relevance, reciprocity, responsibility, and transparency. And so I don't think I really need to speak to those pieces, but that really is our core values and morals that we learned and are trying to advance in the 4 pillars of the nursing discipline across practice, education, research, and policy. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Philip Speck, to carry on the next part of the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. So I just want to take a moment to introduce myself in my own language. Gijiba Wapshke Wabigun, Anishinaabe Ajinikazawin, Wanipikau Indunji Makwa Indundem. So good morning, everybody. I just wanted to bring greetings from Treaty 5 territory in Manitoba. I am originally from Hollowater First Nation in Manitoba, as we mentioned, but I'm sitting now in a community called Barons River and helping out with the shortage of nursing. So I've taken a bit of time to step away from nursing to come and talk to you today. So I'd like to also acknowledge my circle of grandmothers that have sat beside me for the past 6 years while I did this work. And among my many identities as auntie, scholar, sister, mother, I have most recently become a grandmother, and I can't even explain how that transformed my life and have a different understanding and perspective on everything from healthcare to the world we live in. So I just want to talk a little bit about decolonizing and what that means to nursing. So because it really underscores everything that we do, and it really helps understand how we can breaking decolonizing down the way that I have learned to do really helps us understand how we can transform and embed those elements within our health systems as well as in our nursing education system. Because racism continues to have devastating impacts in our communities. We've seen these in stories of Indigenous patients who have experienced mistreatment and neglect and stereotyping in our healthcare systems. So this is why the calls to action, particularly number 23 and 24, are critically important in nursing, and why it's important to understand what decolonizing is. So in my chair and my tenure as chair, I have supported, and my focus has been entirely on supporting the development of the next generation of Indigenous nurse leaders. In Manitoba, we had a serious underrepresentation of Indigenous nurses beyond the entry to practice level. Very serious shortage of nurses in graduate school. So this is where my focus lies. But I want to go back to decolonizing nursing education. And the best example or definition of decolonizing came from our very own Dr. Michael Hart here in Manitoba, along with Dr. Barry LaValle, who wrote a chapter in a book called The Social Determinants of Health in Manitoba. And in this chapter, he broke down colonization into elements, 7 elements in total. And I want to just briefly go through them because understanding colonization in this way will help us to try to think about how they may be countered and embedded within our nursing systems and our nursing education systems. So first of all, he talked about the exercise of power and control over one group of people over another. So I'll come back to that. So we're talking about colonization now. Colonization also involves the reconceptualization of the dominated group by an image or in an image imposed by the dominating group. Number 3, the forced establishment of an alternate political, social, economic, and cultural reality for the colonized. Number 4, the use of racism as a mechanism to entrench and regulate oppression. Number 5, the internalization of imposed oppressive images and realities by both the dominant and the oppressed group. Number 6, the exclusion of Indigenous people from decision-making and self-determination. And number 7, the violent acts of racism, which lead not only to poor health outcomes, but to preventable deaths, as illustrated in the case of Brian Sinclair here in Manitoba. So what relevance does this have to nursing education? So decolonizing nursing education, and we hear this term all the time, or decolonizing our health systems, it's more than adding Indigenous content. It really demands a fundamental transformation of how knowledge is created, taught, and practiced. And in the context of nursing, this all often looks like, so remember those elements, 1 to 7, challenging power and control. So just the antithesis of all of those elements. So restructuring partnerships to ensure that Indigenous governance and shared authority exists in our curriculum, in our research, and our practice. Number 2, rejecting imposed realities. So replacing deficit-based narratives with knowledge defined by Indigenous people, and that means perspectives on health, resilience, and identity. Restoring Indigenous realities, valuing Indigenous worldviews and healing practices alongside biomedical knowledge in our nursing education and health systems. Exposing and dismantling racism. So embedding anti-racism as a core competency and accountability measure in nursing education and practice. Disrupting internalized oppression. So encouraging deep reflection and critical consciousness among students and educators alike. Ensuring Indigenous leadership and voice exists in the academy as well as in nursing education. Co-creating curricula and decision-making that is a shared process with Indigenous people. So in Manitoba, that meant creating a committee that consists of both our knowledge keepers, our settler scholar academics, as well as our Indigenous scholars, to sit around the table and to talk about how we can create a curricula that is more inclusive of our Indigenous knowledges, as well as creating a foundational course for the nursing curricula. And then the ultimate outcome, preventing those violent deaths. So prioritizing equity and cultural safety as life-saving components of nursing practice, not just part of checking a box, but actually embedding those within our health systems. So I just wanted to end by saying understanding colonization and racism through these 7 elements offers nursing students and the academy the tools to critically examine how historical and ongoing inequities shape Indigenous health today. So by addressing these realities directly in education, by carefully looking at these elements how we can embed them within our nursing curricula and our education, and doing it in a way that is inclusive of Indigenous people will lead us to a place that is more inclusive for Indigenous people and more safe environment for our Indigenous people to dwell. So I just want to end there. I do encourage you to read Dr. Michael Hart's chapter in the Social Determinants of Health, and I will put the reference within the chat. So I'll pass it on to Dr. Holly Graham to speak to you about what she is doing in our neighboring province.
Thank you, Wanda. Dansea guatawao kakio, neoma neheo squo oche besuawasis. So I just introduced myself that I'm just from Thunshall First Nation, Cree, Numo ya Weowin Noma Holly Graham. My name is Holly Graham. So welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be with everyone. I always love every opportunity to speak with colleagues. Nurses rule. We are the largest percentage of the healthcare workforce worldwide, which means we have this unique opportunity to actually shape and change healthcare in however we envision our future and current reality. So with the chair, I focused on mentorship and reconciliation. And with mentorship, I started a professional practice group within the College of Registered Nurses of Saskatchewan. And I have to say, they've been the highlight of my partners. Working with the CRNS has been a privilege, and it has been actually incredibly supportive. The College of Registered Nurses Saskatchewan has also started an anti-racism working group within the college and is working actively to address many of the concerns that block and are barriers towards health equity. We've also endorsed and celebrated Indigenous Nurses Day, and that's part of mentorship of not excluding our nursing history within Canadian nursing history. And so it's part of mentoring our upcoming graduates and current nurses as to how Indigenous nurses, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit nurses have contributed to healthcare in Canada and worldwide. As part of reconciliation, it was really important to me that we create some changes in structure. And the University USask College of Nursing has now integrated an Indigenous model alongside their core competencies, and we've called it Wakotwin, which is a Cree concept that we're interconnected and interrelated. So this is now part of curriculum. I've also been working on podcasts from a mental health perspective, Bitagwao, which means come in Cree. And season 1 has been released, and we're completing season 2, and then season 3 will start in January. I would like to mention we've been hearing different perspectives about the TRC calls to action. And just to remind everyone that Call 24 is actually required now for accreditation in all nursing schools, which means this is now a new competency required for all nurses who are currently practicing and future nurses coming into our profession. So as part of Call 24, it speaks specifically that this history is to be taught, United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but also that skills-based training be expanded beyond cultural competency, which we have started in nursing, and conflict resolution, but also to include skills to disrupt racism and to dismantle racism when we witness it, and more importantly, to be able to teach it. So that was really the impetus for me when I wrote the CPR Racism. As you've heard, racism actually is contributing to poor health outcomes, and the worst outcome is death. And unfortunately, we've witnessed that. We've all heard the stories from our relatives, and nationally, cases have been profiled. When Joyce Echaquan, hers was released in the live feed, I was thinking, what could I do as one nurse, in Canada? And at the time, it was during COVID, I was binging on Grey's Anatomy. And little Meredith, all 89 pounds of her soaking wet, when everyone came through the ER, they were always giving CPR. And I thought perhaps this would be a way to highlight the urgency that people are dying as a result of racism. So that's what I entitled my article, CPR Racism. There's a QR code of the publication that goes into much more depth. But this publication And this guide really reinforces best practices. And that's what the Plain Sight Report talked about when they talked about Indigenous specific racism in BC, is how do we create a culture that people start speaking up and then actually take action. And so it provides an opportunity to reflect. And I think the real goal is we want to mitigate, we want to stop racism in healthcare, and we want to create safe places for Indigenous peoples. I'm just merely going to point out one of the R's, and it really talks about how do we intervene. So we have to become a part of the team, we have to review the treatment plan, and of course have had to talk to the patient and heard their story. But it's really important to, when we see discrepancies in healthcare from what we know is evidence-based practice and what is the standard of care, then we need to intervene. It may not just be racism, it may just be unsafe care. So this guide really provides a platform of how we break it down, how we teach it, and kind of provides my plan. Like, how do I intervene? That's the question I often hear is, I don't know what to do. Where do I start? So an example is, after reviewing the evidence-based practices for these presenting concerns, it seems like we're missing, ABC. What do you think? Or just asking, I'm wondering, what is the rationale for this current treatment plan? And those types of questions are to be done neutral, respectfully, because we have to work with each other, right? So we want to have healthy working relationships. But I think what's really important, if we're going to dismantle racism, and particularly looking at equity in healthcare, we actually have to start speaking up and being accountable for what we see in the workplace in there. So that was really the card. I also had a grant for CFI, Canadian Foundation Innovation, and I built a space, had the opportunity to oversee the building, and it's called Good Medicine People, Mio Muskiginawak. And it integrates the 7 sacred teachings of how to have healthy relationships with ourselves and others. And so this is a space where I've had the privilege to bring in knowledge keepers to share traditional concepts and worldviews as part of mentoring our own people, but also as part of reconciliation. So non-Indigenous can actually see that we see ourselves different in this world. We have a spiritual relationship with all of creation, and that is often omitted. And I'll just say omitted for a variety of reasons, and that started with colonization, and that has been very harmful. So the CPR Racism does have a video, and I'm very pleased to say I've partnered with the College of Registered Nurses of Saskatchewan to create this video, and it was sent to all 14,000 practicing nurses in Saskatchewan, along with an anti-racism guide that was developed by the CRNS and worked with our professional practice group so that we reviewed the content as well and added our suggestions. This is the first of this type of opportunity for Indigenous nurses to review policy and practice before it's actually, distributed and put out. So I would say that is a significant step when we look at reconciliation of true partnership and sharing opportunity for change. So I just want to leave you with Gawajit Bimitate is the name of the professional practice group. It is for Indigenous nurses who are undergraduate in programming and practicing. It means a person who walks with others on their journey. And really, that's the privilege we have as nurses, is to walk with others. It never has been about dominating and controlling others. That's how we see it as Indigenous nurses. It is a privilege to walk alongside people when they're at their worst and suffering. So thank you very much. Hi.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we just got a couple more slides here to finish off our presentation. Thank you, Holly. I think it fits really nice into the framework that the BC group has been trying to work with. And really, it's coming at this work as parallel pathways, understanding the importance of traditional knowledge and traditional medicine and how that's situated within our communities. And so taking lead from our scholar, Madeline Dion Stout, really talked to us heavily about the gifts of our language and, the generative medicines we have. So we've built a research program based on remembrance, renewal, and recovery of those traditional knowledge systems. So one of the barriers for me as a Cree scholar was coming and moving and taking this chair within British Columbia territory. So I feel like in the first 5 years of my chair work, it's really been about building relationships. And so I was very fortunate to come across and be engaged with a traditional knowledge holder, Loretta Seymour, from Tecumloops to Secwepemc, who's now journeyed on. But we became very close with my knowledge holder and counterpart that I've been able to lift up the chair with and work more extensively with nurses within the Tecumloops Secwepemc area before moving to UVic. And so Colleen Seymour, and these are kind of some of our signature projects. And you've heard me talk about already leveraging the history of Indigenous nurses of Canada and our involvement with education and policy. And right now, I have to recognize that where most of the work is really happening is on the traditional territories of the Wasanich people. And so you'll see in the bottom corner there that I have the great privilege of just working with such an amazing group of nurses who are passionate, ready to make change. And so, based on that philosophy, we are coming together to build Indigenous graduate education programming in British Columbia, and we will have our first graduates, exciting to know, in June 2025. And the fact that this is the first graduate education program in the country says something for nursing. I think we need to all be held accountable to that. Why in 2025 has it been still so difficult to retain nurses? And this is not just in education, this is across the field. This even speaks to the importance of this chair that, the deep systemic inequities that are created between Indigenous projects and where we need to see us go in the future we haven't even got there yet. I think we just sort of tipped the iceberg. So I just want to take a few minutes to share a little bit about what the other three chairs are doing. We don't have time to go into it because I want to leave you and I want to announce our big event coming up together that we're doing as a collective international body of nurses, including our 6 chairs here. We'll be hosting our event. So on to the next slide. Don Morrison in Nova Scotia, they have created their the new nursing Mi'kmaq program with their research funding. They've done amazing work. I'll go on to the next slide. Do you want me to just finish, Holly, Wanda, just because we're okay? So, and our dear colleague, Emily in Montreal is working on Indigenous specific racism. She's really narrowed down the details of Indigenous specific racism, really highlighting the case. She's been instrumental in doing this work, and she's looking to continue to advance this work and has done some amazing things over there. And then Jason, our final one, Dr. Jason Hickey. Next slide. He's done amazing work in partnership with the community under One Sky and the Friendship Center. And this is another excellent example of community-led Indigenous research. And I think that is really the vision of where we're going is, creating and investing in these chairs so that every province across this country has a seat so that we can invest in rewriting and remembering. We have very sophisticated of traditional knowledge systems, and we know it will benefit the healthcare system. And so just moving on to our last slide, the future of our spaces here is that we have to come together as a global family. We're all working under the guise of, calls to action, UNDRIP, self-determination, right? And coming together at it, this is very exciting that we will be hosting the 4th Indigenous Nursing Research Summit in Victoria, British Columbia in 2026. And I will turn it over to the coordinator slide person to just share a bit of this video. This was done by our BC research team, Nikki Rose Hunter and Michelle Padley, and my postdoc, Liqua. I couldn't have done any of this work without my UVic team. I love you guys. And with that, I just want to leave the last Cree word that Madeline has continually reinforced in my is that we have to get it right. Kwe kakatsowiwin. That is our responsibility to take away collectively. Let's make this right. Thank you.
Thank you again, Lisa, and for recognizing the other research chairs and for letting all of us know about this incredible opportunity with the Indigenous Nursing Research Summit in 2026. We now begin with our keynote presentations for this event. Using a distinctions-based approach, we have 3 powerful speakers who will be each helping us further understand the historical context of colonization, and further to understand this legacy underpinned by white supremacy and its ongoing impact on Indigenous peoples and their interactions with the health system. So we are so honored to first hear from Cheyenne Joseph, who is a member of Alsikuk First Nation in Mi'kmaq Nation, Wabanaki Territory, and current health director for the Assembly of First Nations. Over to you, Cheyenne.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. Wilayexig Mina Delawizit Cheyenne Joseph. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Cheyenne Joseph. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you today from my ancestral homeland, unsurrendered, unceded Mi'kmaq. I also want to acknowledge that yesterday, September 28th, was the 5th anniversary of Joyce Eshquin's passing, and we honor her memory. Her legacy lives on in the fight for justice and through Joyce's principle, which champions culturally safe and compassionate care. We remember Joyce and honor her family and nation and commit to transformative action in her name. As for an introduction about me, I'm a member of Alsikuk First Nation or Bear River First Nation, and I currently live in my husband's home community of Elsipogtog in New Brunswick. I've been a registered nurse for 22 years, specializing in public and community health. working in many sectors from community, government, academia, and I'm currently a student doing a Doctor of Public Health degree at the University of Toronto, focusing on an arts-based research approach, studying Mi'kmaq men's definitions and expressions of masculinity. We'll go to the next slide. So as a First Nation nurse, I've witnessed both the challenges and strengths of our communities in health and healing. Today, I'm here to share some insights on the historical context of colonization and the imposition of Western medical models and the ongoing impacts these forces have on First Nation peoples in the Canadian healthcare system. Each of you as nurses and healthcare professionals play a vital role in shaping the care of First Nation patients and clients at every level, from first line service delivery to academia to policymaking. Understanding the legacy of colonization is not only about history, it's also about recognizing how this history lives in our healthcare practices, policies, and relationships. By deepening our knowledge, we can move toward more equitable, culturally safe, and compassionate care for all. And I invite you to engage today with openness and curiosity as we reflect on these truths together, and to consider how each of us, and as a collective, can contribute to reconciliation and healing. Next slide. Colonization in Canada has deeply shaped the health and well-being of First Nation peoples. Colonial health policies and practices, including residential schools, segregated hospitals, forced sterilizations, and the 60 scoop, were tools of assimilation and control. These policies disrupted lives, families, and healing systems, leading to widespread trauma and ongoing health inequities. The Canadian healthcare system was established within a framework of colonial policies that deliberately privileged Western biomedical knowledge. From its inception, the system was designed and governed by settler institutions with little or no regard for the holistic health practices and perspectives of First Nations peoples. This approach systematically excluded First Nation, Inuit, and Métis worldviews, which emphasized the interconnectedness of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being, as well as the importance of community and land in health. Hospitals, medical and nursing schools, and health policies were built on Eurocentric models, dismissing Indigenous healing as, quote, unscientific or, quote, superstitious. First Nation healers and midwives were marginalized, and their knowledge was not recognized within formal health systems. The prioritization of Western knowledge systems led to epistemic racism, and this is a form of racism that occurs when one knowledge system is privileged over others, leading to the devaluation, dismissal, or erasure of other ways of knowing and understanding the world. In Canada, First Nation ways of knowing and healing were invalidated or ignored. This contributed to the erosion of First Nation cultural practices and further marginalized First Nation peoples within the healthcare system. From the 1980s to the 1990s, Canada operated residential schools to forcibly assimilate First Nation, Inuit, and Métis children. Residential schools stripped children of their families, language, cultural teachings, and practices. Children lived in constant fear and loneliness, and the heartbreak of being separated from their families and communities. Many were punished harshly for simply speaking their own language or expressing their identity. They were denied any sense of safety, a pain that continues to echo across generations, leaving wounds that you as nurses and caregivers still encounter today. The health impacts of residential schools are deeply heartbreaking and continues to endure. These institutions left young children malnourished, defenseless against disease, and facing unimaginable death and loss at a time when they needed safety the most. The echoes of this trauma have not faded. Survivors and generations that followed continue to carry the weight of this pain. These are not just statistics, but lived realities and reminders of our collective responsibility to bring healing and support to those who feel these wounds. The breakdown of family and community connections, loss of language and culture, and lasting mistrust towards institutions, including health, are direct outcomes that continue to affect the health of First Nation people and social determinants of health. Indian hospitals were a network of segregated health facilities established to quarantine and treat First Nation people, especially for tuberculosis. These hospitals operated under poor standards, inadequate or abusive care, and often without true consent for medical procedures. Patients experienced overt racism, overcrowding, under-resourcing, and medical experimentation. Many patients recall being forcibly removed from families or receiving care in isolation from loved ones. Experiences in Indian hospitals compounded mistrust in healthcare and reinforced systemic racism in Canadian medicine. The policy roots of forced sterilizations were spurred by eugenics, ideologies, and racism. Some provinces enacted laws enabling the forced sterilization of individuals deemed, quote, unfit, which disproportionately targeted First Nation women and girls. Even after legislation ended this practice, reports show that Indian hospitals continued with inadequate or absent consent and leveraged power imbalances between patients and providers. Forced sterilization violated fundamental rights, undermined reproductive autonomy, and remains a source of profound trauma and distrust towards health systems. Residential schools were not the only mechanism of assimilation and control. From the 1960s to the 1980s, Canadian authorities removed thousands of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis children from families, placing them in non-Indigenous foster or adoptive homes, often permanently cutting them off from their communities and cultures. Survivors of the 60 scoop carry wounds that run deeper than statistics can ever convey. Many were torn from the arms of loving families and placed into unfamiliar worlds where every piece of their identity was either denied or erased. As adults, they continue to search for healing, connection, and belonging, often struggling with painful isolation and the loss of culture that cannot be measured. The courage of survivors is not only a testament to endurance, but a call for compassion and recognition from all who walk alongside them. Next slide. The Indian Act is a Canadian federal law first enacted in 1876, and it governs matters related to First Nations peoples, their community and lands. It remains the primary legislation through which the federal government administers Indian status, local First Nation governments, and the management of reserve land and communal monies. The Indian Act has had a profound and lasting effect on First Nations peoples, shaping governance, identity, land rights, and cultural survival. While some provisions offer protection, the Act is widely criticized for enabling trauma, human rights violations, and the erosion of First Nation autonomy. The Indian Act became a tool for Canadian government to enforce assimilation and suppress First Nation people and cultures. In 1984, amendments to the Act specifically targeted cultural and healing practices. The potlatch, a central ceremony among West Coast First Nations, was criminalized. And this ceremony was not only a spiritual gathering, but also a means of governance, wealth distribution, and social cohesion. And the government viewed it as a barrier to assimilation and economic progress, labeling it as wasteful and wicked. Participation or assistance in a potlatch became a criminal offense, punishable by imprisonment. In 1895, the ban was expanded to include the sun dance, a sacred healing and renewal ceremony. These bans remained in place until 1951. While sweat lodge the Sweat Lodge ceremony was not always named explicitly in legislation, the broad language of the Indian Act amendments enabled authorities to target and suppress a wide range of First Nation spiritual and healing practices. Indian agents and police were empowered to arrest and imprison those participating in or organizing banned ceremonies. In some cases, ceremonial regalia and sacred objects were confiscated and sent to museums or private collections. Despite these laws, many communities continue to hold ceremonies in secret, risking arrest to maintain their cultural and spiritual traditions. The criminalization of these practices directly attack the foundations of First Nation health, which are rooted in ceremony, community, and connection to land. The bans disrupted the transmission of knowledge between generations and contributed to the continued breakdown of social and healing structures. The criminalization of First Nation ceremonies and the privileging of Western medical models were not isolated policies, but part of a broader colonial project to assimilate First Nation peoples and erase our cultures. These policies directly targeted spiritual and communal foundations of First Nation health, with impacts that continue to reverberate in the Canadian healthcare system today. Recognizing and addressing this history is essential for moving forward towards reconciliation and creating a health system that respects and incorporates First Nation knowledge and practices. Next slide. The exclusion and suppression of First Nation health practices had profound and lasting effects. Far too often, First Nation patients and clients find themselves denied the right to use sacred medicines or to practice traditions like smudging within healthcare spaces, places that claim to offer healing, yet instead reinforce exclusion. These moments of disregard do more than deny care. They can deepen isolation and send a painful message that First Nation, Inuit, and Métis ways of healing are not welcomed or respected. And such barriers don't just keep people from traditional medicines, they keep hearts from feeling safe, seen, and at home in places meant for comfort and recovery. The marginalization of traditional healing and the imposition of Western medical models have contributed to persistent health disparities, including high rates of chronic disease, mental health illnesses, and lower life expectancy. Colonial policies created complex jurisdictional issues, often limiting access to culturally appropriate healthcare services and restricting First Nation peoples' participation in health policy and decision-making. Slide 6, next one. First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities across Canada have shown tremendous resilience in the face of centuries of adversity, colonization, and the attempted erasure of our cultures. Despite the lasting effects of forced displacement, residential schools, the 60s scoop, and ongoing systemic barriers, communities have continuously drawn strength from their cultural traditions, languages, kinship networks, and deep connection to the land. A strength-based approach that recognizes First Nation people's ability to persevere, innovate, and heal is essential for understanding the ongoing well-being and vitality seen in many communities today. First Nation leadership is a cornerstone of progress towards better health outcomes and equitable health systems. When First Nation, Inuit, and Métis lead the design, delivery, and governance of health services, outcomes measurably improve, not only in access and quality of care, but also in holistic wellness that encompass the physical, the emotional, spiritual, and community dimensions. Notable impacts of First Nation leadership in health include self-determination and governance, cultural safety and holistic care, empowerment, and advocacy. The transfer of control over health systems, as demonstrated by the First Nation Health Authority in British Columbia, enables health services to be tailored to the specific needs and values of First Nation communities. First Nation leaders champion approaches that integrate traditional knowledge, medicines, and healing practices, creating culturally safe environments that encourage trust and participation in healthcare systems. Empowered leadership promotes advocacy for community priorities. It supports the development of health strategies rooted in First Nation ways of knowing and propels systemic change toward reconciliation within the health sector. The resilience of First Nation communities and the leadership shown in advancing culturally appropriate, community-directed health systems are not only sources of strength, but they're also models of wellness for all Canadians. Recognizing, supporting, and following the leadership of First Nation people in health continues to be crucial for addressing inequities, restoring autonomy, and fostering wellness across generations. Next slide. Nurses and healthcare leaders must purposefully seek out education on First Nation, Inuit, and Métis histories, cultures, the impact of colonization, and the realities of systemic racism in healthcare. Engaging with resources such as continuous cultural safety training, applying cultural safety and humility standards, anti-racism guidelines, and First Nation, Inuit, and Métis-led education is central for building foundational knowledge and empathy. Routinely evaluate personal attitudes and behaviors for implicit bias or microaggressions, and be prepared to confront these openly as part of professional growth. Amplify the voices of those who speak publicly in support of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis rights to equitable, culturally safe healthcare, and back policy reforms that remove barriers, such as Jordan's Principle, Joyce's Principle, and the TRC calls to action. Create authentic partnerships with First Nation, Inuit, and Métis leaders, elders, and community members to guide service delivery and ensure that health interventions are relevant and respectful. Work collaboratively with First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities on the planning, implementation, and evaluation of health programs. This includes sharing decision-making authority and respecting community priorities and protocols. Recognize the strength and expertise within First Nation communities by supporting First Nation, Inuit, and Métis-led health services, research projects, and leadership development, and ensuring that partnerships honor the principles of self-determination. By embracing these concrete steps, nurses and healthcare leaders can play transformative roles in both healing past harms and advancing First Nation, Inuit, and Métis health equity within the healthcare system. Next slide. Today, we've explored the profound legacy of colonization and its ongoing impact within the healthcare system. We've revisited the painful realities of residential schools, Indian hospitals, forced sterilization, and the 60 scoop, policies that tore apart families, criminalized healing, and cast long shadows still seen in today's healthcare system. We've examined how exclusion and suppression of First Nation practices, knowledge, and leadership are not relics of the past, but living systems that persist in our workplaces, our policies, and clinical choices. These truths can be difficult to face, but they are essential if we're going to break the cycle of harm and contribute to healing. Understanding history is not just an academic exercise. It's the key to creating meaningful, lasting change. And it calls us to individually and collectively to reflect on our roles and responsibilities, not only as healthcare professionals, but as human beings and treaty people sharing this land. I invite you all to continue this journey far beyond today. Keep learning from the history, from our elders, from colleagues, and especially from the voices of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities themselves. Transform your learning into action, foster allyship, challenge racism, and embrace the power of partnership. Know that every choice to listen, to advocate, to act with humility and courage is a step towards equity and reconciliation. And final slide. Wilaliok, thank you, merci, for your attention, your care, and your resolve. It's a privilege to share this space with you today, and it's through our shared commitment and our everyday actions that we can build a health system rooted in justice, honesty, and true holistic wellness for all people.
Thank you, Cheyenne, for your presentation and to help us further understand the historical context and the power of First Nations leadership and self-determination. Next, we have Sophie Pamak, an Inuk from Hopedale, Nunatsiavut, and former community health nurse in her own community for several decades. Over to you, Sophie.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for having the opportunity to be here and share what things are like in my part of the world. My name is Sophie Pamak. I'm a Inuk and member of the Nunavut land claim agreement within Northern Labrador called Nunavut. And I'm raised by my grandparents, so they raised their children, and those children went through what's called the boarding school system, and then they adopted me. So a lot of what's here, it's kind of in the layout. I was trying to like split it all up, but it's such a mesh together. It's kind of hard to see it as separate because, you know, life isn't like that, eh? For a bit of history for here in Northern Labrador, Inuit were first colonized by the German missionaries in the 1700s, and their purpose for coming was for trade and resources and to colonize us and teach us a better way than our heathen ways. So through that colonization process, we've lost some parts of our culture along the way, which we are now starting to regain, such things as traditional Inuit drumming, traditional Inuit markings, tattooings, and a lot of the German way about doing things have remained through our church system, which is where we came to be Christianized to the Moravian religion. So that would be some of the things like our church services, special holidays throughout the year, the music, the singing, the hymns, the brass band, that type of thing. And so they were setting up missions in Northern Labrador, and it was for that purpose. So they set up various missions on the north coast of Labrador starting in the 1700s. Once people became Christianized, then looking back and reading things, it kind of seemed more like slavery is my take on it. Like, you know, you take us away from our way of living and then you teach us a different way. Some things may be better, other things no. So then it was like Inuit were then used in the mission for, you know, labor, housekeeping, childcare, sewing ability, things like that. So, but the whole point was the benefit for the missionaries was the colonizing so that they can take the resource they want. There were some benefits for the Inuit side of things, like the writing system, able to read and write in our own language. Then we had the illness, the Spanish flu, which I think maybe some of you may or may not have heard of. And for those who aren't familiar with that, it was the pandemic back in the early 1900s. Some of the resources that you could look at is Them Days Publications, which is out of Happy Valley Goose Bay, Labrador. They have different volumes on first-hand accounts from survivors for the Spanish flu. And also The Last Days of Tuurngaq, which is a national film board with Nigel Markham and I believe Anne Budgell. And Anne Budgell as well had published her book, We All Expected to Die. That was right in around pandemic COVID time. So I know one of the presenters earlier mentioned about TB. We do have a lot of issue with TB in our region historically and still currently. So for anyone wondering what an experience could have been like, what we offer here with Nunavut Government Department of Health and Social Development is part of the orientation to coming to work is the film The Necessities of Life, which documents an Inuit man from northern Canada who goes down to Montreal for his treatment. So he only speaks in it, they speak French, and what that experience has been like. So when you talk about the after effects of the Spanish flu, So most of Labrador was affected, especially in the north as well, same as everywhere globally, I guess, at the time. So there was a mission ship coming from St. John's, Newfoundland, heading to northern Labrador with supplies to drop off supplies and I guess pick up their goods from their trade and whatnot. So that ship left, the Harmony left St. John's October 20th, 1918, and then arrived in Hebron on October 27th and stayed until November 4th. And then from there, it traveled on to Utkuk. But while it was there in Hebron, the captain had said that they have a sick crew member on board and didn't want anybody coming on board. But the missionary of the time neglected to tell the Inuit that was doing the unloading that was there. So November, the boat went on to Utkuk on the 4th, and the morning of the 7th, which is was the first death, and then in the following days, many more people died. So by the time November 19th rolled around, there were 15 survivors in Hebron. So and same thing with Utkuk when they traveled on to Utkuk. Out of that community, there were 59 survivors. 49 were under 18 and 19 were women, and then there were a number of children as well. So this is where I talk about, like, my dad or my grandfather who raised me. He was one of those child survivors of Utkuk, and when I had my kids, I just couldn't imagine what it was like for him to survive. Him and his sister survived, his aunt survived, and a few other relatives. As a child growing up, I always used to say to Dad, like, how come we're the only Pamuks? All my friends got, like, lots of Jarsies and McCratsuks and Simiaks and Unaliks and all, you know? And he didn't really answer it. I guess at that time he didn't know what to say, I suppose. But as I began to learn about the Spanish flu and what he went through, and then having the opportunity to see the full family tree over years, and most recently again when we had our 100-year commemoration for the Spanish flu of Utkuk, Patty Way's family trees that she had done up for the descendants' families. And when you see how big our Palmuk family originally had been to what it came down to, it was like, and it's not only our family, like, it's so many. Now I always think about what would our population have been like? What would our Inuit would be like now today? Because being a survivor, him having survived the Spanish flu and going to live with other relatives further south, is outside of Nain, it's such a loss. Like, it's a third of the Inuit population at the time was wiped out. And, there's little coverage. Like, to think back to that pandemic, access to communication, everything was a dog team or a boat. So it's not like pick up the phone, or even back in the days of saying over. And so nobody knew. Nobody knew about the devastation that was going on until it was all said and done. And, they're wondering how you're going to dispose of bodies. Women were those that were surviving, were sewing body bags, and they were, when the ice got thick enough, they were putting them down through the ice to weight them down. So that was the extent of a burial. And then you talk about then the forced relocation of Hebron, Utkuk, and Nutak. At that time, Utkuk was a bigger population than Hebron, and Nutak was a little bit smaller. So they were, because of, I guess, the church and the government, when we became out from under the Great Britain Dominion, and we became, at that time, the province of Newfoundland, which is now Newfoundland and Labrador. It's still an issue with services and forcing people to move. And how they go about it is they hold it in a church, which I guess for those times, I guess most times is, you go to church, you don't say nothing. Not to say confrontational, but like, stand up for yourself and voice your opinion. And this is to me, this is the rationale why they held that meeting there in the church was, you're in a church and your congregation and population is not going to speak up in church. And it just got pushed through. So the province kind of dropped the ball there, and with the province and the Moravian missionaries became the boarding school side of things. I guess the boarding school, I guess outside it's called residential system, but it's the same thing. Kids were taken, they had to go to school. The bad experiences they've had here there, like I said, my grandparents raised me, and my aunt telling me about a few things about a way at boarding school, getting her hair pulled and cutting her hair, and the constant bullying and mistreatment. So there's that whole side, the idea that Inuit aren't a strong people is kind of what the common thread is. But for myself, that's not the belief I grew up with. My dad always said, oh, we're strong people. Inuit are so smart. We're so strong. We can do anything we put our mind to. And, those things about you're no better than anybody, and nobody is no better than you. Even if they're a white person, because, there's still that white people are better than us. And man, did I hear a lot of that growing up, and how they treat people, who they, the school system, the health system, how to access health. And, people got TB and they went away and they died, and they never even bothered to send people home for burial or send them home to pass away. So, there's so much that's just so intertwined. Get a good education, stay in school, he valued, despite what his children went through in their own experiences in boarding school. It was still heavily placed on me, like, stay in school, get a good education. You can have whatever job you want here, home. All these white people, we're all smart people. You can come and have whatever job you want and go wherever you want. Like, his idea was to be the first prime minister, which I thought was kind of far-fetched. And he said, well, why not? Like, we're smart people. You figure out how to get there, you could be prime minister. So it's a lot of encouragement in that way that I've had, and I was fortunate for that, because many other of my classmates, people I grew up with in my community, didn't have that opportunity. So because of all that, trying to access health changes who you are. It's a totally different experience because of how you feel about yourself, how you've been made to feel about yourself. If it's not directly to you, then it was done to your parents, because most everybody on the coast of Labrador has been to boarding school. Some have happy memories, many don't. Between that and relocation, and what a forced relocation does to your mental health, to being accepted in a community, not accepted, where you hunt, where you fish, that all has an effect on everything you do. Like some of the things over the years about, teaching diabetes education, you're teaching them like, oh, eat this, eat that. But when you're struggling just to eat anything, housing, heat, Canada's food guide is not your priority. Having all that access and trying to access it, not act like, like it's like you're kind of like a guinea pig in how people access things. You feel like you're a guinea pig. And we've spent a summer when I'm from Maine originally, so when the local clinic was going for accreditation, we had to myself and my roommate, who was also a nursing student, organize their charts for accreditation, and it was just kind of organizing everything, and it was kind of monotonous. So we started reading stuff, and we started reading like, oh my God, we were truly guinea pigs. You've seen surgery reports, research reports about surgeries on your eyes to correct your eyes. Not that you've got issue with vision, it's to give your eye shape a more Caucasian look. Like it's really mind-blowing that, you know, or you talk about documentation, what you can and can't document. There's a lot of stuff that would never ever go on a chart today. So all those things, and then you add on, like Beverly mentioned earlier, about, you know, because of the forced relocation, because of the, you know, the Spanish flu, what that did to your families, and that follows down the generations. Same as the residential school, is a lack of trust. A lack of trust when you go, that you're not going to be shooed away or taken seriously or given the opportunity to even have a say. Like most of my career, I'm cutting close to 30 now, so all that time I'm still telling people, you know, you have a right to question this, you have a right to disagree, you can ask for a second opinion. If you don't agree with the doctor saying, or you don't like, you can say something. But a lot of people aren't ingrained with that. Either it's because of the church, the schooling system they grew up, or just so believe that, you know, as a person, an individual, or the whole, like the Inuit population, that we don't have a right, and we do. But there's a lot of people that still have that belief, like you don't have a right because you're treated like a second-class citizen. And I know some people talk about being the guinea pigs. Literally, we have been. It's the lack of trust. Like, if you're mistreated, or you know someone in your family's mistreated, then you really don't have that trust there. Like, I think of some things in my own personal experience within my family that, you know, it wasn't good, and decided not to pursue things, and it's still not good. Like, it could be way better than what it is, and it's just like, how valued are we? You have to fight and fight, and you have to fight for what you want and for what you need for the health system. And I mean, this is now 2025. This is not way back 40, 50, 60 years ago, which was a whole different thing, like back then anyway. And we shouldn't have to fight, but it is. And you know, a lot of people, because of their life circumstances, their history, they don't have it in them to fight. You know, they just be quiet and not say anything, or agree to stuff that, because they think the doctor has the final say, this is what you do, and that's not really the case. For my own self, and they talk about residential schools and health and accessing health, it comes from a lot of that. I've listened to the Truth and Reconciliation. A gentleman gave a story about, he was 6 years old and he went away to boarding school and he was sat there. And there was this thing on his plate and he didn't know what it was. How are you supposed to eat that? What do you do with that? And turns out it was half a raw turnip. And he didn't know what to do with it, never seen it before. And I thought about growing up, and my dad said, you know, we have to be able to eat anything when you go away to school. And I think that's because of all the experiences people have had with residential schools, food, language loss. Like, I went away to university, I came back. People were shocked I still spoke Inuktitut. I said, I only went away for 4 months. But it's a different time, you know, that things weren't the way they are now, although somewhat it hasn't changed a whole lot either. But there's a lot of things, people, what they do based on their experience. I mean, that's could be everywhere, but you know, I just think about that. It's not, you have to be able to eat anything when you go away to school. You might not like it, but doesn't mean you can't eat it. So, well, thank you for listening to me, and I hope it was beneficial. And Daima, thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, for sharing your journey and helping us to understand the historical context from an Inuit perspective, particularly the experience of a Labrador Inuit. Next, we have Denise McQuaig, a Métis woman of Kamloops, British Columbia, who is currently an executive director at Healthcare Excellence Canada. Over to you, Denise.
Boon Matan, Denise McQuaig, Deshinakashon. So good day, I'm Denise McQuaig. And I'm here to talk to you about my Métis perspective of anti-Indigenous racism. I want to start just by sharing with you that I am the granddaughter of Lillian Belrose. I am Métis through my mother's side, and a direct descendant of Cuthbert Grant Jr., a founder in the Red River, of part of the Métis Nation. Next slide, please. I have the great honor for the past 26 plus years to choose as my home Kamloops de Secwepemc, or what is colonially known as Kamloops, British Columbia. The map you see before you on the screen is of Secwepemc Ulu, where there are 17 Secwepemc reserve communities within the Secwepemc Ulu or Shuswap territory. And I feel very privileged to be able to raise my family here and to call it my home. I am the mother of 4 adult children. Our youngest is 39, the oldest is 44. We have 7 grandchildren between the ages of 5 and 19. And I am married to Bob McQuaig, a Cowichan First Nations man. And so we are a blended family. Both of us have been married previously. Half of my children and grandchildren are First Nations, and half of my children and grandchildren are Métis. Next slide, please. Today we talk about anti-Indigenous racism specifically. And for those of you who are providing healthcare, it is about the biases, the stereotypes, the way in which you perceive or think you understand who we are as a people. It is about the reflection in the systems of care, education, justice, and other forms of organization of how we are treated as inferior. And it is all based on Canadian legislations, laws, and processes emerging from colonialism and based on colonial policies and a goal of assimilation. Next slide, please. What's important for you to understand when I am talking about the Métis Nation is the concept of ethnogenesis. This is an anthropological term, and it's used to talk about the shared experiences that is forced upon people by migration, displacement, or oppression. And when they have this happen in their lives, they come together to develop a common language, common customs, common traditions, and as a result, they form an ethnicity. In this case, the ethnicity is Métis, but there are many groups across the globe where ethnogenesis has occurred. African Americans, for example, I'm sure you would understand fully the oppression and the displacement that they experienced, mostly through the 16th and early 1800s, where they were brought from Africa to the shores of America. They themselves formed their own culture, coming together from different originating African nations, but are African American. Another group might be the Sephardic Jews who live in Spain. So they are of Spanish and Portuguese mixed ancestry. They were forced away from Spain in 1492. They maintained their Jewish practices throughout, and today about 45,000 Sephardic Jews live in Spain and identify as Jewish. Next slide, please. As a definition of Métis, I have chosen that that is defined by the Métis National Council at a time when all of the Métis Nation governing groups were sitting together at the table. We are a distinct Aboriginal peoples. We form from the historic Métis Nation ancestry, and we are accepted as citizens by the Métis Nation. We do not refer to our identification in the nation as Métis status. Status is something that is related to the Indian Act. We define ourselves as citizens of the nation. I can tell you that in order to become a citizen in Métis Nation, British Columbia, where I reside, it was extremely rigorous process of genealogical ancestry, birth certificates, death certificates, baptismal certificates. I had to show all the way back to 1909 my direct lineage and kinship. I cannot speak to how that happens in all of the other governing bodies that represent the Métis, but I can say that we are recognized as Indigenous under Section 35 of the Constitution of Canada, distinct with First Nations or Status Indians and the Inuit. Next slide, please. The biggest defining of anti-Indigenous racism, I think, for Métis is the challenge to our identity. Before you, I have put some things that we often hear. Métis people are not Indigenous. You don't look Native. You're too many generations away from the original First Nations ancestor. You're not Aboriginal. How much Native are you, etc. And I ask you to position yourself in what that might sound like if you applied it to another group of people, like African Americans. Would anyone ever imagine asking one of them, how African are you? But it's something that our people commonly experience when they take the courage to identify as being Métis, only to find others challenging their very core of identity and who they are. I also want to share with you on this slide that being Métis did not exclude us from residential schools, the 60 Scoop, the impact of child welfare, and any other assimilation or oppression agendas within Canadian society. And I myself am an intergenerational survivor. My grandmother attended the St. Albert Youville School as a residential school student. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to sort of steer away a little bit from talking about Métis, and I will say this, I'm going to talk to you about the limits of Indian status under the Indian Act. Normally, as a Métis woman, I wouldn't speak to the Indian Act, but as the wife and the mother of status children and a First Nations husband, he has given me permission to talk very specifically about how Indian Act can impact the family. So this is a genogram. Circles are female, those who assigned female at birth. Squares are those assigned male at birth. The blue identifies those who are Indigenous, or in this case, Indian, under the legislation of the Indian Act. And those that are in circles or squares that are white are individuals who are in fact not Indigenous. So we have here a First Nations woman. Both of her parents were Cowichan First Nations. She's the I circle at section 6.1. And her partner in life is a non-Indigenous man of Scottish ancestry. They had 3 children together, a boy and 2 girls. And at the time of their births, they were all considered Indians or status under the Act. In 1952, they got legally married. They had a marriage certificate that now defined their relationship. And had 3 more children, so 6 children in total. So those are the 3 towards the bottom right of your screen, 2 boys and a girl. Next slide, please. However, at the time of that marriage in 1952, under the Act, she is no longer legally considered an Indian. She loses her status by virtue of having been married. And the 3 children that were born after wedlock, after 1952 and the marriage occurred, are also no longer considered Indians. So they don't participate in the reserve community. They don't have any of the benefits associated with a status card. But the 3 children who were born before the marriage occurred have maintained their status. So they are still considered Indians under the Act. And in fact, their firstborn, the boy, he married a non-Native woman, a Caucasian woman, but they were married in 1981. Why this is significant is because under the Indian Act at that time, that woman became a status Indian. And at no time does she lose that status. So not through divorce, not through death. She will maintain her identity as a status Indian under the Act. Next slide, please. None of this changes until a Supreme Court of Canada case identifies this as paternalistic and racist legislative practice, and they introduced Bill C-31. After 1986, the mother, the original First Nations woman in this family genogram, and the 3 children born after wedlock have all had the ability to regain their status. And again, the woman who actually divorced from their eldest son has maintained her status throughout, although never having Indigenous bloodline. Why do I share this with you? Because this is often the bar that people hold me to as a Métis woman. They try to define my ability to identify as Indigenous by their understanding of the 4-generation ruling of the Indian Act, where the Indian Act, through its agenda of assimilation, says that if you cannot link 4 generations to the original full-blooded Indian, if you will, blood quantum, you can no longer legally call yourself a status Indian. And this in 2025 makes for great complexity and is often the root cause for all of the kinds of questions that I've shared with you in previous slides. Next slide, please. Métis people originated in the 1700s. We are made up of ancestry of often French and Scottish fur traders and Indigenous women such as Cree and Ojibwe, but not only through that First Nations lineage. We have a distinct culture, values, nationhood, way of living, language, dance, food. I could go on, and that is different than those in the very far east of Canada who may choose to use the word Métis to describe who they are, knowing that as a French or originating word, Métis means mixed blood. But that is not the group that I refer to when I speak of the Métis Nation. It is those who originated during this time frame, linked to the Red River, to Manitoba, to Saskatchewan, Alberta, and small parts of British Columbia where we have historic presence. Next slide, please. As it says in the Constitution of 1982, we were recognized as a distinct Aboriginal peoples of Canada, that we have rights under the Constitution, and I want to be very specific here about rights. I have rights to health, to education, to raising my children, to justice, to affirmative action hiring, to right the wrongs of oppression and colonization experienced by my family. But because I choose to reside in British Columbia, I do not have title. I don't have a right that is linked to the lands of the territories in which I reside. I have no say in the trees, in what comes out of the ground, in how the traditional territory holders govern themselves. I am a guest in British Columbia, but it doesn't extinguish my rights as an Indigenous person. It doesn't mean that I can't harvest to feed my family, that I can't practice my Native spirituality, and that I cannot identify as an Indigenous person. Those rights are protected. Next slide, please. And so we are often referred to as Otipemisiwak. It is a Cree word referring to the Métis people as the people who own themselves or the people who govern themselves. The definition of Métis has never been a legislated definition. But if I was to say to you today that I have been here since time immemorial, that would be a true statement. And if I was to say to you today that my children, my grandchildren, and those yet born will continue to be Métis, that will also be a true statement. It's super important that you understand that I respect that the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples are self-governing, sovereign people, and we have the right to define our own nationality, our own citizens, and that should not be applied to or defined by the colonial government of Canada. And so I respect every First Nation in how they choose to identify their citizenship in ways that are meaningful to them, and ask that all healthcare providers provide that same respect to my fellow citizens and members of the Métis Nation. Next slide, please. This is the St. Albert Uville School. It's where my grandmother attended, and this picture on the left of the screen is in fact my grandmother on the right, Lillian Belrose, and her elder sister, Laura Belrose, both at the time Métis students of the St. Albert Uville School that was later replaced in the late 1920s, early 1930s by Poundmaker. As I said before, being of mixed ancestry, being Métis, did not protect us from the residential school experiences. My grandmother's only spoke Cree at home as she was growing up as a child, and that drastically changed after she was 13 and attending the residential school. She didn't talk a lot about that experience. She didn't share it with us. I know it was extremely painful and difficult for her. And this picture from the Canadian Archives is actually the only evidence my family has left of her residential school experiences. But I can assure you that the pain, the disconnection from her culture, the lack of confidence she had in publicly declaring herself as a Métis woman continues to be felt in my generation and the other generations that followed. Next slide, please. And so I want to talk about these three lovely Métis children in front of you. These are a sibling group. There's about 10 years between the eldest, the one with brown hair and brown eyes in the purple on the far left, and the one in pigtails with the blonde hair and blue eyes on the far right. Nothing changed about the mixed ancestry of these children. They have the same parents, the same grandparents, the same lineage. But as you can see by the way they look on the screen, they don't present the same. This is my family. I am the child with the brown hair on the left, my brother Kevin in the middle, my sister Nicole on the far right. Not long ago, my sister and I, her in her late 40s, myself in my late 50s, were gathered for our typical Saturday afternoon of tea drinking and beating. We fondly call it the bitch and stitch. And I took a very vulnerable opportunity to say to my sister, sis, I gotta tell you, I think I've held a little bit of resentment against you our whole lives because you live with privilege. And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, you know, you look white. No one questions your identity. No one follows you in the store like you're going to steal something. No one overlooks you in the line at the bank. No one treats you like you don't belong because you don't look like me. And she was instantly angry. And she said, how dare you? You're the one with the privilege. You can declare your Métis and no one challenges you. You can navigate the Indigenous community, attend a powwow, be part of practicing our culture, and no one looks at you like it's cultural appropriation. You've never had someone walk up to you at a public event and question why you were wearing a ribbon skirt. You're the one with all of the privilege. It was a tearful and difficult conversation, and I was shocked that we were as old as we were and had never taken the time to have it. But each of those experiences are valid, and each of those are Métis experiences of navigating Canadian society, and at times even our own nation and our relationships with First Nations kin. She described how she attended an Aboriginal tourism course at college and spent more time trying to convince the fellow students and the professors that she deserved to be there. This is anti-Indigenous racism. What is your call to action as a healthcare professional? Examine your own privilege. Think about your social positionality. Take the time to learn the realities of our lived and living experience, and understand that your unconscious bias creates an environment for systemic racism to thrive. Next slide, please. This is our next generation. On the left is my daughter and granddaughter, and on the right, my nieces. My nieces have a father who is himself First Nations and a 60s scoop survivor. They were told that they had to choose. They haven't grown up with their father in their life. They grew up in my sister's home and is intricate part of our family. But they cannot be Métis and hold a status card. In fact, when you apply for a Métis citizenship card with Métis Nation, British Columbia, you have to sign a declaration that you do not qualify to be recognized as status under the Indian Act. And so by the laws of the land, by access to benefits, to what people consider financial resources, these young women were forced to choose. And on the left, my daughter and granddaughter, who are proud Métis women, continue to have the same experiences as my sister, where when they take the courage to speak out loud that they are Métis, they are questioned, they are denied, and they are told that they are not Indigenous enough. Next slide, please. So I bring to you today some resources. If you wish to learn more about Métis people, please consider reading The Northwest is Our Mother by Jean Tillett. It is also available audio and through Audible. Think about rethinking patient safety. Expand your understandings of harm to include psychological safety and cultural safety. And if you're interested in a discussion guide to help have that conversation with your colleagues in the workplace, you can find that there at Healthcare Excellence Canada. Understand that we have developed cultural safety indicators in Canada through the Health Standard Organization, and those are available through that link. Know that anti-oppression is a practice that can be dismantled and reframed. And you will find Dr. Stephanie Nixon and First Nations psychologist Dr. Ed Connors talking about that in a recording at the link provided here for you. And it's an important thing to consider when you think about the positionality that you have. And we had the great honor at Healthcare Excellence Canada, my employer, of recording the Métis healthcare experiences in Saskatchewan. And those are available to you as a video where you can come to understand how pan-Indigenous approaches, how First Nations centric approaches, and how a lack of services that are Métis specific can impact our well-being overall. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share with you my own living experience as a Métis woman. This recording and these slides will be made available to you. I ask you to remember the principles of OCAP: ownership, control, access, and possession. You are welcome to use any of my slides, but please, if you wish to reference anything from the recording related to my family or my family pictures, reach out and ask permission. I own the story. I control who has access. I will continue to possess it, even though I openly share it with you today. And thank you for taking time out of your very busy lives in a healthcare system that has great challenges to open your hearts and minds to hearing our truth today. Merci.
Thank you, Denise, for your very powerful presentation, in particular, helping us to further understand the Métis identity and rights as self-governing people and as defined by yourselves. We appreciate all three of you sharing your living experience, knowledge, and vulnerabilities to help us further understand this harsh history and how it has and continues to impact the experiences of Indigenous peoples as they interact with the health system. It is important that as healthcare professionals, we understand this dark and complex history and how that transcends into the realities of today. We really appreciate your insights and perspectives. And I want to acknowledge how important it is to understand the truth before proceeding to reconciliation. Our keynote speakers provided you with very thorough and distinctions-based histories, but there's still much to learn as there are over 600 diverse Indigenous communities across the country. CNA recognizes the responsibility of upholding the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, and I have some very important news to share with participants today. CNA is very excited to announce that we have co-developed a nursing-specific lesson with Envision and Indigenous nurse leaders from across the nation. This lesson, which addresses Indigenous-specific racism in nursing and healthcare, is part of an existing online cultural awareness course called The Path, Your Journey Through Indigenous Canada. This meets the several calls to action, but specifically addresses call to action number 24. We are very excited to share this course, and it will be made available to members in the coming weeks. Additional details will be available via our website and social media platforms, so stay tuned. Such an exciting opportunity to work with Indigenous nursing leaders across the nation and to collaborate with Envision under Hillary's leadership. So thank you so much, Hillary. We will now hand it over to Hillary Fry, CNA's Indigenous Policy Analyst, who will be moderating the lived experience panel. Hillary is a Labrador Inuk of mixed ancestry and registered nurse from Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador. Hillary joined the CNA team in October 2024, and she has been leading CNA's reconciliation efforts and is a complete delight to work with, and her leadership has been outstanding along this journey. Over to you, Hillary.
Thank you, Val. Tilihai Ilanasi, welcome everyone. It is now my honor to introduce to you our esteemed panelists to share their lived experiences, including the strengths and challenges of addressing anti-Indigenous racism in colonial systems like the healthcare system. Each panelist will share a 15-minute presentation, and we will allow for a period of Q&A from the audience at the end of their sessions. Over to you, Monica.
Thank you so much, Hillary. I'm just very grateful to be here today. I just want to acknowledge that I'm coming today from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And I'm also really wanting to raise my hands in appreciation to Darlene McIntosh, our elder, for opening us up in such a beautiful way today. I'm honored to be a panelist today on the Canadian Nurses Association Anti-Indigenous Racism Knowing and Sharing. And it's already been such a wonderful event, and I personally am learning so much. My name is Monica McAlduff, and I am from the traditional territories of the Swiatmik Nation on my mother's side and French Canadian ancestry on my father's side. On my first slide here, we can move to the first one. You can see a picture of myself, And also my colleague, Gary Housty, who is currently serving as the Chief Nursing and Allied Health Officer and VP for Quality at First Nations Health Authority. So we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So I just want to thank all that have joined across Canada. This is a country that has much work to do around truth and reconciliation. However, it's events like these that will help change our healthcare system and address racism that still exists in the system. And as we address the health inequities that we still see, we have much work to do, but it's inspiring to know that we are moving in the right direction. Next slide. So I am a psych nurse, and I've been nursing for over 30 years, and I currently serve at the First Nations Health Authority as their CEO. I'm grateful to be in this role and bring my nursing and operational experience to this position. I really believe that my experience has led me here today, and this is a calling from my ancestors to step forward, step into leadership, and I'm very humbled to walk alongside First Nations people in BC as we work to improve health outcomes for First Nations children's, families, and communities. Next slide. I would be remiss not to talk a little bit about my organization, as it's the first, and I know it was mentioned a little bit earlier as well, it's the first and only provincial First Nations Health Authority in Canada. The FNHA is transforming the way First Nations access and engage in healthcare through direct services, funding, partnership, collaboration, and health system innovation. A number of guiding elements were built to direct our work, including a vision, values, principles, which we share with our First Nations health governance partners. The BC First Nations instructed the Health Council, the Health Directors Association, and FNHA to follow these 7 directives that are listed on the screen. These were affirmed and developed by First Nations leaders and chiefs across the province. The health governance structure is also guided by the principle of reciprocal accountability and an approved engagement approval pathways to gather input and guide and build consensus on key decisions related to governance. They are fundamental standards and instructions for the new health governance relationships, and together they form the foundation of our services, policies, and partnerships. This is an example of how, as First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, we can be self-determining and dismantle the colonial health structures and embed our traditional teachings and way of being in how we deliver services. Next slide. The FNHA is the First Nations, the FNHA is grounded by the First Nations perspective on wellness. This is a holistic vision of wellness that takes into account environmental, social, cultural, and economic considerations in the determinants of health. The original image was created from feedback and ideas gathered from BC First Nations over years and from traditional teachings and approaches shared by First Nations healers, elders, at gatherings convened by the First Nations and its predecessor, the First Nations Health Society. This representation was developed by the FNHA with input from our federal and provincial government partners. Our partnerships with First Nations communities and the province have enabled integration of this approach into programs and services, leveraging these partnerships in a new way to develop a new model of First Nations-led care. This model incorporates traditional teachings, knowledge, and traditional medicine and ways of healing. It has been such a gift to work in this organization where the organizational's vision, values, and perspectives on health resonate with me so deeply. Next slide. I also want to share the good work that has started in FNHA, and this is a way in which we can address racism in the healthcare system, and it's specifically through accreditation. FNHA and the Health Standards Organization created a Made in BC Culture, Safety, and Humility standard. I'm very pleased to say that this work, which was also mentioned earlier, is also being rolled out on a national level. I am very proud to say that I am part of that technical committee, and this good work that is underway, it's really built on the good work that has happened historically, and it's intended to be transformational, hold the health system accountable, be transparent, and also be measurable. It's strength-based, people-centered, and trauma-informed. And so this is one really good work that we all need to move forward in a good way. Next slide. So now I would like to talk a little bit about my own personal experience. My mom actually is a residential school survivor, and she did go to the Kamloops Indian Residential School, as well as my grandparents. I actually just learned about my grandparents going just in this last year that my mom shared with me. She was a nurse's aide, and she is my inspiration, and she really encouraged me to pursue my nursing education. And it was her resiliency that really inspired me to become a nurse. So I'm so grateful for her. When I started out as a nursing student, there were no Métis, First Nations, Inuit people in my classroom. And it actually took me a few years of nursing before I had another colleague who was First Nations or Inuit and Métis. And I'm fortunate and not proud to say when racist comments or situations happened that I didn't always speak up. It didn't feel safe for me as a nurse. And I do know that the system is changing. However, I knew in the beginning it was not a safe place for me to identify as First Nations. In order to make that change, I really knew that I needed to be in positions of leadership to help change the policies and impact the system in a bigger way. And that is why, for me, wanting to go into leadership roles and position is what motivated me to take those challenges and help change the system. And I knew if I needed to change that system, I really needed to be relational. I needed to share my culture. I needed to be who I really am. And I wanted to be able to be in a position of change so I could make those changes. And so I'm really grateful to be in my current role and to help change the system. So next slide. So it's been really wonderful to be here today and to be hearing of so many inspirational nurses and the good work that is happening across Canada. As nurses, we do need to support one another. We need to lift up one another. We need to be gracious with our teaching of one another, as we're all on our own lifelong journey of what it means to be an Indigenous nurse. We need to mentor one another so we can create good space for the next generation of nurse leaders. We are stronger by supporting one another and not losing our new grads because of the challenges that still exist for Indigenous nurses. We need not to rely on others to be that support. We need to be that support. We need to showcase the relational aspect of being First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We need to bring our culture to the workplace, and we need to support the nurses. Next slide. As nurses, we also need to find our allies who work with us, our colleagues who assist us with this good work. No matter what your position in your organization, you can make a difference. And with work with the HSO and the National Standard on Culture, Safety, and Humility, we're only going to make that change by working together with our allies. And as this picture depicts, we need to be in the canoe traveling together. Whether we like it or not, we are in this healthcare system together. So like this canoe depicts, we need to, number one, we need to all get into the canoe, and we need to find those people that actually want to get in. And we actually need to find those people that not only want to get in the canoe, but they want to pick up that paddle and paddle with us in the same direction. And as you move together in the same direction, we also need to celebrate the good work that is happening on addressing anti-Indigenous racism. We need to celebrate those wins. We need to build those relationships. We need to build that partnership, because we will be stronger together. And I really encourage you, if you have never been in a canoe with others, it's a really good teaching opportunity. So that will be my encouragement to all of you. And then my last slide. As we recognize tomorrow as Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Day, let us all be inspired to know that the changes we make today will impact the future generations to come in Canada. We know that Canada has lots of work to do. However, we are moving and we are paddling in the right direction. And we are the leaders in the health system. And so we need to be the change that needs to happen. Zero tolerance for Indigenous racism. Lead the way to embed culture, safety, and humility standard in your worksite. Be bold in telling your truth. Hold the system accountable and know that you are the voice that we all need to hear. Thank you for your time today and your desire to learn and grow as nurses together. Crooks Jam.
Nakumisawak, thank you so much, Monica. That was wonderful. I really appreciated how you shared how we can support each other as nurses and as people, and of course for generations to come. You bringing your over 35 years experience to us from numerous roles across the health system, and of course in your current role as Chief Executive Officer of First Nations Health Authority, we are very grateful for your presence today. Thank you. Next, we have Stephanie Tuurngaq. Stephanie is an Inuk nurse from Igloolik, Nunavut. She is a CNA board member, CNA Indigenous Relations Action Council member, and works with other organizations with the goal to advance cultural safety and humility within healthcare. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So excited to be here. My name is Stephanie Tuurngaq. You might also know me as Stephanie Gilbert. I'm living and working in Yellowknife Northwest Territories, which is the home of the Yellowknife Dene First Nation, Chief Dragi's territory. But I'm originally from Nunavut. So I grew up in Igloolik and in Iqaluit in Nunavut, and I'm here representing my family, my home community in Igloolik. And today I'm going to be talking about my lived experience as an Inuk nurse and how I've learned to now teach about the strengths and challenges of addressing Indigenous specific racism in our very colonial health system. Next slide, please. I wanted to start with a bit of a case study. I think that as nurses, it's a way we're all used to learning. And so I wanted to talk about a real life example. So this example actually occurred as an encounter early in my career when I was just a brand new nurse. And I was still learning how to become who I am today, which is an advocate. And I, in particular, learned a lot from this encounter. So I wanted to share it as an example. So I was an emerg nurse and I loved night shifts. I thought that night shifts were the best. It was just an energy about the night shift that I truly enjoyed. And over the several nights in a row, a particular client kept coming into the emerg in the evenings. She was a First Nations woman. I had known her from the community, and I knew contextually that she was a 60s scoop survivor. She had mentioned that to me in one of our visits. And she had been coming in several nights in a row with COPD exacerbation. And what she really wanted from us was a safe place to receive care. Now, contextually, lots of respiratory illnesses circulating in the community, so not unheard of for an individual to come in with an exacerbation. And she was coming at night specifically because she knew us night shift nurses and she felt safe with us there to receive care. And so that was really important to me that my encounters with her continued to be a safe place. I think as nurses, we're all driven to want to provide that kind of safety. So I do my job, I triage her, I assess her, I start her treatment, and then I go off into the office and I report off to the physician. Now I'm going to provide some context about this physician. This physician was fairly new, but he was also trained at a time, luckily, where in his training, they were taught to be relational. He was, particularly good at connecting with patients. He felt that getting to know patients is really important. And he was very relational in the way he engaged with patients, so for the most part, really good encounters working with this physician. So he goes in, he does his job. And when he returns back to the office, he says to me, that client was really apathetic. And I found that to be such a strange description of this person, having known her quite well. And so I asked what he meant. And he described that he had gone in there and he said, I used open body language and really good eye contact. And I taught her a lot about COPD and I talked a lot about the treatment options. And she didn't really engage with me. And so I just find her quite apathetic. And so I felt that right away that wasn't a great descriptor in general, but particularly from what I knew of this client. And so my thought was to kind of explore that a little bit more with this physician. And I said, maybe it's not apathy. This individual the background, you're doing all the right things on paper, check, 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 relational practice, but are you applying that to the right context and in the right way for this person? I assumed that because I'm also Indigenous, that lots of people understood this context, this history, the truth of what Indigenous people in Canada have experienced with the healthcare system. And I found in that moment that that was not true. He asked me what I meant. And so I gave a quick little bit of teaching about that. And his response was a good one. He said, okay, I have a lot to learn so that I can do better next time. And he did. He tried to go in there and try a different rapport with her. And they eventually did make a bit of a connection. But for me, that really radicalized me in my nursing career. I thought, okay, what can I do with my colleagues and in my work setting to make sure that people can take all those great skills that they learn in their training and apply them to First Nations, Inuit and Métis clients so that those encounters are much safer. So thinking about this as an example, I'm going to share next on the next slide a little bit of why I sort of was ready to understand that encounter differently than this gentleman did. And so as an Inuk, we have a huge amount of value in lived experience. The way we tell our stories, our songs, our art. Lots of cultures really value lived experience. For Inuit, we call this Kaumi Tuurngaq, which is our collective knowledge. Now, if we translate that to English, it says traditional knowledge, which isn't a very powerful term. But if we look at it from the Inuit meaning, it talks about the accumulated knowledge of Inuit interrelationships with family, the land, community. And this really describes what we value and how we describe our well-being and how we describe our society. So as Inuit, our lived experience and our collective knowledge is of huge value. And we teach those principles very specifically so that Inuit can be better ready to engage with others in our own community, but also people from outside of our community. And some of those principles are serving family and community, being innovative, being resourceful, working together towards a common cause, and really being open, welcome, and inclusive. So if this is the way you're brought up, these are the values that you're taught and you hold as a person, no matter where you apply that, that can become very powerful. So in my nursing, I thought, well, there's certainly space for this to exist in my nursing career. And so this was the first step where I thought, okay, I'm going to make change in nursing. I had big ideas about how that would look. But I knew that if I took those principles and I carried them forward, that I could help others be just as powerful in their nursing careers as I felt in that moment where I had that aha moment. Next slide, please. So why is this so important? Well, we know that healthcare in Canada is colonial. We've had many speakers describing to us what that colonial healthcare system looks like, how it functions. But we have ongoing evidence of it. So for those that are not quite sold, let's look at some of the evidence of that. Well, we know we have unequal resource distribution. We know that we have funding and resources centralized in locations of the privilege that reinforces and maintains that privilege. And we also know that we have racism and we have cultural insensitivity, which might be on purpose or by accident. For example, in that case study, that physician was unintentionally harmful in that health encounter. And he took that as a learning moment, which is a beautiful thing. But we also continue to have labels: at risk, apathetic, non-compliant. And these are terms that are very normal and almost expected to see in nursing charting or in charting on individuals' health records. And they're often used to describe Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. And that very existence of that kind of language is in and of itself evidence of a colonial healthcare system. And besides that, we have significant data and lots of research that tells us that there is significant impacts of chronic and communicable disease, mental health, substance use, violence, unemployment, lower education access, and lower service access in Indigenous communities. And so when we look at that, we know that the healthcare system itself was designed and perfected to a point to keep those disparities and those social determinants of health such as they are. Now, there's plenty more examples we could talk about, but instead I'd like to focus on solutions. So next slide, please. Great. So if we look at the way our healthcare system is designed, the colonial system itself. Now, this is a framework that was taught to me by Dr. Ogisto Horn, who is this fantastic and extremely talented Indigenous advocate. She's a Haudenosaunee and Mohawk physician, and she taught me this framework. And when she taught this to me, it sort of opened up my mind to think about how do we make change in a colonial healthcare system that doesn't uphold colonialism, but instead upholds reconciliation. So those components are rights, legislation, institutions, programs and policies, and conduct. So if we look at rights, they're aspirational, and they tell us what we should have as human beings, and what we should have in particular as Indigenous people. But the way that those are enacted and protected in society is through legislation and legal orders. So those laws tell us what we should be doing and how that should look. And if we don't uphold those rights, what happens? Some kind of outcome or remediation. That legislation helps institutions understand what to do, how to function, how to deliver services. And in turn, those institutions function based on programs and policies. So programs and policies actually give the step-by-step process of how an institution functions. And in turn, as individuals who either seek care within those institutions or work within those institutions, those programs and policies describe how we should conduct ourselves or how we behave within those systems. And I'm going to go into more detail about each of those components. Next slide, please. Great. So for rights, obviously all humans have rights. But in particular, I want to talk about UNDRIP, or the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which describes very specific rights for Indigenous people. And that's the right to self-determination, self-government, the right to maintain and develop our culture, our identities, to participate in decisions that affect us, to be free from discrimination, and that we have rights to land, territories, and resources. So keep those rights in mind as we progress through the rest of this framework. Next slide. So again, I talked about how legal orders describe how those rights are protected or enacted or how they apply in general within our society. And there's two legal orders I'd like to focus on right now. And that's in 2024, we have our National Council for Reconciliation Act, which for those who aren't familiar, it's an act that holds the Government of Canada accountable to meet the calls to action. And so what that means is that we have this big standing legal order that tells us that as a country, our society must meet the calls to action. So while it does hold the Government of Canada accountable, we do see a trickle-down effect into our provinces and territories and those legal orders. In addition to that, in 2021, we had the UNDRIP Act, which again holds the Government of Canada accountable to meet the rights of Indigenous people in Canada. So the way that that would look in our society as a whole. And then, of course, the idea being that in your province or territory where you work as a nurse, you're also looking at your own legislation, your own standards of practice, various acts that you must follow, things like your Public Health Act or your Hospital Administration Act. And all of those legal orders tell you what you are expected to do as a nurse in service delivery and in your role as a professional. And so the idea being that with these two legal orders, what we should start to see as time moves forward is more and more changes in our provinces and territories in those legal orders to describe how to meet the NCR Act and the UNDRIP Act, for example. Next slide, please. So again, institutions. When I say institutions, and I'm talking about healthcare, the healthcare system, we're talking about any place where we either deliver services, plan service delivery, or teach and inform about health services. So those are our hospitals, our clinics, the university that we've received our training at, our regulatory bodies, and our licensing bodies. So all of those institutions are required to meet those legal orders and to provide some kind of service or investment into the healthcare system, whether that be by training professionals or by monitoring or regulating healthcare professionals. And when we think about this step in that framework, institutions who are transformed, decolonized, that would be the truest form and the best possible version of anti-Indigenous racism work. So that transformation within our institutions that will address Indigenous specific racism. And this is a really critical part of that framework to look at because institutions are where we touch clients. So whether we are meeting clients or we are designing policies or we are creating changes about best practice in the healthcare system, this step becomes so critical. And we know that institutions communicate their work and how they function to those within those systems via policies and programs. And policies and programs, they're very critical because they describe roles and responsibilities. They decide your strategic planning or the way you're going to do your business. And they also describe what goals and outcomes and influences they expect to see from the work that happens within those institutions. And I would say that policies and programs are very critical and require the most work to realign themselves for reconciliation. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at policies and programs, this is where I eventually situated myself in my career. I now work specifically in policy because I see this as the leverage point to create that change, that system-wide change. If we have really good programs and service delivery, and we have really strong, safe policies that tell people how to function within those institutions, we can actually create system-wide safety. And so when we think about all the institutions that we all work in, we know that every institution has some kind of framework for program and policy development. And so if those frameworks are really situated in the calls to action and situated in UNDRIP, we can actually see that very important change happening at the point of care. All frameworks and program and policy development, the way healthcare system works, we all have a method that helps to onboard individuals to use those policies, to uphold the principles and goals and objectives of a policy, and to improve them. And that's usually via some kind of feedback mechanism, like a complaints process or a feedback process, surveys, all of these different mechanisms that tell us how we can do better. And so one thing that I get asked a lot is, okay, I'm also in a situation in my career, I'm in a position in my career where I can help make some of these changes. So how do I do that? And what is a good resource that I could use to make those changes? So obviously the calls to action and UNDRIP, they're fantastic resources. But we also have, as a partnership between SENA and the schools of nursing, a really beautiful framework, the Cultural Humility and Cultural Safety Standards for Nursing Education. And this was published, it's absolutely beautiful. It describes how nursing education should be taught that centers the calls to action and in UNDRIP in your day-to-day learning as in your nursing school. And so it actually starts you off understanding all of the things that we're trying to teach people today, all of these collective speakers. And so instead of doing a catch-up later in your career, it actually centers all of these concepts and all this knowledge within the very foundation of your nursing education. So really important resource. We also have a newly updated code of ethics from the CNA, which absolutely centers reconciliation as part of your day-to-day duty as a professional nurse. And it's really, really well done. And it really helps you understand what you can do and what attitudes and behaviors you can take on within your day-to-day nursing to support safety for Indigenous folks. which is really important. And then Monica touched on it, the Winds of Change, which is the national standard for cultural safety and humility. That's in the works. Monica and I are both on that technical committee, and it will be coming out for public review soon. So once that is published, that'll be another great resource to help you with those critical changes in your workplace. Next slide, please. So conduct. So conduct is the way that we behave. So as a nurse, this is usually the part that you have the most control over, how you engage with your clients at the point of care. How do your clients feel when they're interacting with you at the point of care? Now you have the most control over that step. It does not mean that we don't have a system-wide accountability to look back on the other parts of the framework and address and create change at all of those points, all those components. But again, conduct is very important. And the reason why is because we know that Indigenous people specifically identify the conduct, the way that you as a healthcare professional behave, what your attitude is like, what actions and decisions that you make, and how they feel about that. That's what they remember. And that experience is what's most important to an Indigenous client in front of you. So as an example, thinking back on that original case study, that physician provided care that was evidence-based, it was relational. He provided treatment options that met best practice. He was following the policies that were in front of him, and he felt that he was doing a really safe job. Now, again, really thinking about how that felt for her was that at the end of that, she was still feeling a little bit unsure, a little bit unsafe. And again, the way that we conduct ourselves becomes very critical. We know that cultural safety training is very important. It helps us get those toolkits in place. It helps us move forward in the way we engage and how that point of care feels. But again, unless we are set up for success with those policies and those legal orders and the way our institution upholds all of those things, our conduct, we might not know the best way to do that. And so that's why training like the training that CNA will be publishing and the way that participating in events like this becomes really important. Next slide, please. So again, to make sure that you're as safe as possible, it's really important to understand that we need consistency. We all need to know what to expect and how to behave and how to conduct ourselves as professionals. We need policies in place that help us understand what we're aiming for. What is the metric for success? And so one thing you can do as a nurse is really come to understand common terminology about cultural safety, cultural humility, understanding Indigenous people and their lived experience, and really become that advocate for changes in your workplace. And really look to your regulatory bodies and making sure that there is a place that you can safely report any concerns regarding racism in the workplace. And of course, participating in that continuing education, which CNA has just made an exciting announcement about, which is fantastic. Next slide. So I think in summary, we know that from all of the stories that were shared today, that Indigenous clients have a very particular lived experience and context and a really horrible history of genocide and violence and harms. And the one thing we can ask nurses to do to address that is absolutely to advocate for all of those changes within those components of our healthcare system so that we can reach for system transformation. And I think I've gone a little bit over time, but thank you everyone. And I'm hoping everybody starts to think about the alignment of all of those changes that we just went through. Thank you.
Nakumisoak Stephanie, thank you so much. The real life experience that you shared was very powerful and certainly helped deepen our understanding of the importance of cultural safety and humility for the remainder of your presentation. Now, last but not least, we have Savannah Large. Savannah, a Plains Cree from Whitefish Lake First Nation in Treaty 6, is currently a fourth-year Bachelor of Nursing student. Having worked as a licensed practical nurse since 2022, most of Savannah's experience has been in the acute care setting. Over to you, Savannah.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Savannah Large. I'm a Plains Cree, and my Cree name given to me by my Cookum, also known as Grandma, is Huhusis, which means owl in Cree. I'm a fourth-year nursing student attending University of Calgary's Bachelor of Nursing program. My presentation is titled Anti-Indigenous Racism Through an Indigenous Nursing Student Lens. So just a little bit of a background. I come from Whitefish Lake First Nation in northern Alberta, located within Treaty 6 territory. I lived in my First Nations community from when I was a baby to about when I was 23 years old. I'm currently a licensed practical nurse and work as a casual nurse at one urban hospital and 2 rural hospitals. And my area of nursing is internal medicine / acute care. Next slide. So racism does not only show up as interpersonal racism, so person to person, but it can also show up in our educational and healthcare systems. Systemic racism is embedded in the structures, the policies, and within educational and workplace cultures. Some challenges as an Indigenous nursing student I experienced were lack of Indigenous healthcare representation, financial barriers such as limited funding for education, learning to live outside our own communities, experiencing a disconnect from cultural teachings, and learning to navigate educational and healthcare systems. We leave our communities to further our education, and sometimes this often means experiencing a disconnect from our culture, our teachings, and our ways of life. Things we are disconnected from within our culture are things like being around our Cree language, sweats, beading, ribbon skirt making, moccasin making, and regalia making. Going back to history, Indigenous people were placed on reservations with a lack of funding, resources, and support. As I started the Bachelor of Nursing program, I reflected on my past experiences as a nursing student in Edmonton for my LPN program. I left my community, got accepted into school, and had to learn how to navigate this myself. In classes, I had to learn what was expected of me in a system that didn't reflect my culture or my community. And throughout my years of school, I reminded myself that I belong here. That term that I used throughout all my years of school, I belong here, emphasizes the emotional and psychological burden imposed by these structures. I remember when my friend Shabay and I were riding in her vehicle on our way home from clinical, we were talking about how we never saw any Indigenous nurses at the hospitals or clinics in our area growing up. There's a need to increase Indigenous healthcare representation because it builds trust with Indigenous patients. When Indigenous patients see someone who shares the same background and cultural beliefs as them, they are more likely to open up, be accepting of care, and seek medical care early, not avoid it until it's too late. It improves health outcomes. Research shows that it leads to medical adherence and better chronic disease management. It challenges systemic racism because Indigenous healthcare workers call out existing biases, advocate for policy change, and promote cultural safety. I recall one early morning as I was getting ready to head out the door for work, and my niece, who was 3 at the time, would get so excited and would repeatedly ask me, "Auntie, you're a doctor?" I mean, I wasn't a doctor, but that is what she understood it as at the time. Which brings me to my final point. Indigenous healthcare representation matters and challenges the notion of who gets to belong within the healthcare system. Perspectives shift among healthcare workers and patients, and it shows Indigenous children and youth that they also belong within the healthcare systems too. Next slide, please. Historical trauma effects experienced by Indigenous people has resulted in mistrust of healthcare providers and healthcare systems. Many are reluctant to seek care until conditions and diseases advances due to ongoing discrimination, bias, and stereotyping. A Canadian Review research study screened 2,250 journal articles and 9 literature reports that were published since 2000. Out of the 2,250 journal articles and the 9 literature reports that were screened, 66 studies were included in the final review. The results from the study emphasized that racism within healthcare was related to reluctance to seek healthcare, potentially leading to higher unmet healthcare needs. So Statistics Canada revealed that 84% of Indigenous people felt they were ignored, received delayed treatment, and were being treated differently than others. Health concerns were also minimized or dismissed, and cultural protocols were not honored or respected. Next slide. Slide just shows research indicating that trauma, such as residential school impacts, is linked to genetics and conditions such as type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, depression, anxiety, addiction, cancer, and so on. Next slide, please. So what can we do and what strengths do we build upon? As Indigenous nurses and nursing students, we can bridge gaps by establishing trust and safety among Indigenous patients, show resilience and leadership skills, provide culturally safe care to patients, and build connections with other Indigenous nursing students. We can advocate for systemic gap closures and promote health equity. We can build trust. Another strength we have is staying grounded through our cultural practices, such as smudging before clinical days. Next slide. So this study demonstrates that social determinants of health account for 30 to 55% of health outcomes, keeping in mind that Indigenous people were placed onto reservations where there is unequal access to resources and supports, putting them at a disadvantage socially and economically. Next slide. This one just goes into two-eyed seeing. It's a concept that shows us Western medicine is in one eye, traditional medicine in the other, and to use both eyes together. This is a good concept that can hopefully be one day implemented in nursing medical curriculum. I know for me, when I stumbled upon this phrase, it helped me make sense of things and put two worlds together. Next slide. How does racism show up in healthcare? It's being dismissed, not believed, or not being taken seriously. It can lead to delayed diagnosis and lower quality treatment. It's stereotyping and as well as an underfunding of Indigenous healthcare-led services. Next slide. For nursing students, this is the best time to start educating about cultural safety. It begins with recognizing and promoting awareness of the historical impacts residential schools place upon Indigenous people, the mistrust that develop, and how biases can interrupt and impede quality healthcare services. Nursing students have the ability to influence change not only in the future, but starting now within the clinical settings. Next slide. Going forward, we must continue to integrate historical knowledge into medical and nursing curriculum, build partnerships with Indigenous healthcare providers, elders, and community members, increase Indigenous healthcare representation, and stay committed to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. Thank you.
Nakumisowak, thank you so much, Savannah. The way you framed the responsibilities of nursing students along with the visual was very helpful. I really appreciate it. I would now like to take this time to thank all three panelists for having the courage to share your lived experiences, including both the strengths and challenges of addressing anti-Indigenous racism in colonial systems like the health system. We are so grateful to have the three of you with your diverse backgrounds, experiences, and expertise with us today, and we have much to learn from you. We will now take questions from the audience for the next 10 minutes. I kindly ask participants to pose their questions in the Q&A function. If you would like your question posed to a specific panelist, please indicate who. Since we are behind on time, we will be sure to have a list of unanswered questions, which will be answered and sent to registered participants at a later time. Thank you. Okay, and I see we have our first question. Someone would like an explanation of smudging, and I am going to direct this question, knowing Monica's background, to her specifically, please.
Thank you so much. It's a great question, and I think everyone does it differently, but it's really burning. Usually it's sage, or it could be other material, even tobacco. And it's a way to cleanse yourself, and with the smoke from that, it's put over you, and someone usually does it on your behalf, but you can do it yourself as well. So there's just different ways to do the ceremony, and it really is about cleansing and cleansing away anything sort of negative energies and putting in the positive as well. I think that would be a high-level way of saying that. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. That was great. And our next question is there a framework healthcare organizations can use to address complaints of interpersonal or systemic racism in healthcare? And I am going to direct this question to Stephanie, please.
I'm not surprised that you sent that my way. I think that in general, that's part of the work that we hope that institutions will bring alongside. So for example, often with truth and reconciliation work, we don't want Indigenous folks to have to do all of the work. We want to do it alongside our non-Indigenous counterparts. And so part of what, without giving too much away, because it's still confidential, but part of what that national standard that Monica and I are working on is going to be calling to do changes like that within institutions, standardizing those things and creating a safe way that matches the institution that you're working in. Whether that comes from direction from provincial or territorial legislation or from regulatory bodies or within the board of that institution. So I think that work is to come and will be standardized, but will be based off of UNDRIP, calls to action, national standards, things like that. So there isn't any one answer at this time, but it will be coming for sure.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. We've got some more questions here. Monica, I'm going to circle back to you. How can Indigenous nurses get Indigenous mentors in their communities?
Thank you. I'm glad you went to this question because I'm actually mentoring a few different First Nations nurses within my circle of influence. And I think really it's offering and people asking. And again, it goes back to that relationship and that opportunity to build relationships with people within your community and being intentional and seeking them out. And most people, I think, are honored to be a mentor, to be honest. But again, it's going back to being really clear what you're asking for, what are your sort of terms of that relationship, and seeking them out. So I would just ask around and be intentional around seeking someone that might be a good fit for a mentor for you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Monica. This question was for you specifically, Savannah, and it says, do you have any questions on what measures can educational institutions enact to address the concerns you've identified about feeling disconnected to community and culture? I think we have a time for one last question. So Stephanie, I'm going to direct this one back to you. Working alongside local nations for memorandum of understanding for healthcare delivery, can you recommend 1, Indigenous knowledge translation method, and 2, a way of inquiry to address the nation's needs and how those fall into health authority policy and process? That's a good one for you, Stephanie.
Good question. Yeah, I think the main thing that people are looking for from an Indigenous community is knowing that the representative is someone from their community that they've endorsed to speak on their behalf. So that's a really critical step. Is you could hire anyone, you could hire me to randomly come and talk about whatever community, but is that the most appropriate step? So really getting to know your community leaders, in particular your Indigenous leaders, going and creating relationships with them, and then asking, who should we look to for some guidance on this process, and making sure that they're community endorsed. That is absolutely critical. You know, and that's a strengths-based approach to engagement with the community. Also recognizing that when you as an institution are ready to do some of that work, you also have to create a relationship that is healed enough for that community to want to trust to work with you. So sometimes it's not about getting those actions done right away. It's about creating those communication pathways and those relationships first so that they can trust you enough to actually engage in that process with you. Does that make sense?
Yes, that was wonderful, Stephanie. Thank you so much. And thank you to our 3 panelists again. We are so grateful for your presence here today and the sharings that you've given us. Back to you, Val.
Thanks so much, Hillary. So thank you for your incredible moderation of the panelists, Hillary, and for your insights and perspectives, Monica, Stephanie, and Savannah. Savannah, you truly moved me. Such power and leadership as a nursing student. Thank you so much for coming today. You moved all of us with sharing of your very valuable lived experiences and knowledge expertise. This brings us to our last session of the day, which is an interactive activity led by the wonderful Dr. Christina Chakanyaka and Don Gugu. Christina is from the Dene Cree and Métis homelands and rural remote Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. Christina is a proud Métis nurse, educator, and researcher. Dawn is Mi'kmaq, registered nurse, researcher, and storyteller from Wegoma Ulne-Wegani. Christina and Dawn, we look forward to our time together this afternoon. Over to both of you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dawn Gugu. I am in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. I am a Mi'kmaq woman, a wife, a mother, a sister, a veteran, and a proud Indigenous nurse. We want to thank the CNA for giving us the opportunity to sit and learn with you all today. I also hope that we can contribute meaningfully to the powerful voices we've heard today.
My name is Christina Marie Chakanuka. I'm joining you from the unceded Coast Salish homelands, the Lekwungen and Wasanich nations. Myself, I'm a cisgender, neurodiverse Métis woman, a mother of 3. I'm a nurse, an educator, aspiring researcher. I'm also a daughter, a sister, and a friend. I was born and raised in Tabacha, meaning beside the rapids, in a town colonially known as Fort Smith. Population approximately 2,500. In the South Slave region of the Northwest Territories on Treaty 8 territory, which is the traditional lands of the Tabate, Denesulene, and Cree and Métis peoples. My matrilineal roots extend through the Villebring, Gladue, Toronjo, and St. Cyr, as well as Mercredi and Larocque families. My parents, Marie Villebrin MacDonald and Ian MacDonald, raised me, thankfully, to maintain strong connections to my mother's Dene, Métis, and British relatives, as well as my father's multi-generational Scottish Canadian settler relatives. As Denise was speaking earlier, I felt a need to share a bit more in my introduction. My maternal grandmother, Mary Evans, trained at the Florence Nightingale School of Nursing as a nurse midwife, immigrated to Canada, and met my grandfather, Ernest Villebrin. He was a residential school survivor. He attended Acacho Hall in Yellowknife, and although he was designated Cree Métis at birth, in 1985, with Bill C-31, he regained his treaty Indian status as a member of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, along with his mother, Mary Gladue. I myself am a proud member of the Fort Smith Métis Local 50 and the NWT Métis Nation. Regarding First Nations and Métis land and cultural rights in the Northwest Territories and Northern Alberta, as Fort Smith sits right on the 60th parallel, colonial legislation of Indian status, coupled with the conservation legislation of Wood Buffalo National Park, has made a lasting impact on identity, on connections, and status for Dene, Cree, and Métis people. My recent PhD explored intergenerational Indigenous nurse wellness and mentorship within community, and I'm really thankful for all of the speakers who have spoken today and what has been shared. Over to you, Dawn.
Thanks, Christina. I felt like today we were talking about, and I always say this, is people need to know who we are. And that's kind of what me and Christina are going to be working on today. So I'm from Wegoma Ulne-Wegani in Mi'kma'ki. Wegoma translates to where the water ends or the head of the waters. And Ulne-Wegani translates to the Indigenous community where the Indigenous people live. And Ulnu, which is the beginning of the word Ulne-Wegani, means Indigenous in the Mi'kmaq language. So our community logo here was developed just a few years ago, created by community members to reflect our visual identity in Wegoma Ulne-Wegani. I share this so that you can better understand and recognize our communities, our language, and our culture. So it's important to remember that Indigenous people across Turtle Island each have their own unique cultures, languages, and customs. While we may share some common values, every nation, community, territory holds its own identity and ways of knowing. So over time, our community has been renamed many times, but we've always called it Wegoma Onwegari. And the time has come for others to learn who we are and where we come from. Next slide.
A windshield survey is a preliminary community assessment tool used by nurses to observe and understand a community's environment, strengths, and needs at first glance. Often used by, early on in nursing education. As Dawn and I were preparing this, we were reflecting on the view through the windshield as a metaphor for how colonization has shaped Canadian healthcare. Just as a cracked windshield distorts the view of the road ahead, colonization has fractured the lens through which many Canadian nurses perceive Indigenous peoples, families, and communities. This broken lens skews our understanding and also often reinforces biases, obscures realities, strengths, and holistic needs of Indigenous communities. Next slide, please.
So here's a video of my community, just a small clip, and it's a drone survey as opposed to windshield because of the technology we have today.
Thank you, Dawn. Next slide. So we're going to respond and engage. If you can scan the QR code on your screen, you can log into Mentimeter, where we're going to have a few questions for you to engage with. 1, 2, or 3 word answers are usually easiest. And there's going to be a word cloud. So I'll pause for a moment for the team at the Canadian Nurses Association to transition to Mentimeter and invite the audience to have a look. If you can scan that QR code, you can participate. We're good to go now. Excellent. So as you can see at the top of the screen, if you are at menti.com, you can use code 88579856. And the question for those who are here today is this: what is your initial assessment of this community? What do you see? And so just while the answers and responses are coming in, we'd like to have a look at as they're coming in on the next page. Nice. Good to hear. And good to see. All right. Next slide, please. Oh, back a slide, please. All right. Dawn has some things to share.
So we were going to do this another slide of my community and give you my assessment of my own community. So community assessments are often informed by social determinants of health, the conditions on which people are born, grow, live, work, and age. So my assessment focuses not only on identifying the needs and the barriers within the community, but also highlights the resilience, culture, and social networks deeply rooted. So the environment has a lot of green space and the land slopes gently into the water. And at first glance, it may seem like there's plenty of land and water to access and resource. But building on a slope comes with high cost, and the water from the bay has never been suitable for drinking. So our infrastructure, including water, sewage, and waste system have never received the funding from the government, and our communities were excluded from provincial infrastructure planning and systems. So these ongoing deficiencies, along with the government's allocation of land that was less fertile, had less water, and difficult terrain, limited our communities to prosper. And that in turn impacts all aspects of the social determinants of health. However, we remain strong. Cultural resilience, community strength, self-determination efforts are powerful forces driving healing and change. So as you saw in the video, there were a few larger buildings and a ball field, which is the heart of our community. And these spaces is where we come to celebrate who we are and where we come from. When we have a ball tournament, we come together. When someone is ill or injured, we come together. When someone is on their journey into the spirit world, we come together. And when an elder speaks, we listen. So I want to invite all of you to shift your perspective, look beyond the challenges and often associated with Indigenous communities, and instead see and learn our vibrant celebrations like powwows, creation stories, our cultural richness like youth programs, traditional teachings, and our community strengths like revitalization, and learn the name of the nearby Indigenous community in their language. You can read about a people's past, but you won't feel their spirit until you show up, until you stand where they stand and listen when they speak and honor their traditions. When you engage with Indigenous communities directly, respectfully, you create a space for deeper understanding, kindness, and respect.
All right, so we can skip ahead 2 slides. And this is it here. The question for everybody, if you're using the Mentimeter code and entering the second opportunity to engage, what do you see? The Mentimeter word cloud, the words get, as I'm sure most of you know, but there's like 500 people on, as the words, the frequency at which the words are put in centralizes and makes the font bigger in this word cloud on Menti. And so with that, thank you so much for participating in these 2. We'll go to the next slide. Thank you.
And so I'm going to share with you all what I see when I look at this painting. What I see is my father and my sister, Shannon, who is also a nurse. This painting shows a piece of how we honor those who are entering the spirit world. My father is in the home he helped build, the home where he raised us to know who we are and to accept and respect all people, all cultures, and all celebrations. So around his neck, he's wearing the patron Saint Anne. And we weren't raised in any one culture. My dad actually explored quite a few cultures. So when I see the Saint Anne on him, I see how our culture has welcomed and accepted and even celebrated many of the fates that were forced upon us. We celebrate many events with the Canadian culture: Christmas, Easter, Canada Day, Remembrance Day. And so this painting was actually created by one of my 7 sisters, so another sister, and she's my baby sister there, Buffy Gogo. She's an artist. And she titled this painting Gesalo, which means I love you in Mi'kmaq. So I'm going to share her words on her description of this painting because she tells her story the best. So these are the words of Buffy. My father's passing was my first real experience of death and how culture gathers together in the last days of dying to help them move into the spirit world. My dad was a strong man who did not want to die. Just a week before, he had told me, like many times before, he was going to beat the cancer. Even though he still did not accept his death, he eventually asked for us to stay with him, and he did not want to be alone in the end. This painting is of my sister, who stayed with Dad right to the very end. She and I stayed by his side for 6 days and nights. The reason I named it Gesalo is because my father had a hard time saying I love you. He was a very strong Mi'kmaq speaker, and I would always tell him, Dad, I love you. He would hesitate and brush it off, which eventually I started saying Gesalo, and he started saying it back to me. And it meant a lot to me to paint this because it was something, because I wanted to create something that I was proud of and that he would be proud of. I took many pictures of my father's inevitable journey into the spirit world, which with each of my sisters without them being aware, mostly for my memories, and I challenged myself to paint it. There was a time when I stopped painting, but this photo inspired me to paint again. And I asked my sister Shannon if she would mind. I'm so sorry, I thought I wouldn't get too emotional, but anyways, if I painted a picture of her and Dad, she didn't expect it to be this creation because she didn't know about the photo. And I am very pleased with how it came out and happy I can share this gift with my family. So I'm very proud of my sister Buffy. I'm always telling everybody about her artistic skills, and I love that she titled her work in Mi'kmaq. Mi'kmaq is what finally led her to hearing Gesalo, I love you, from her father. Language is vital to who we are and where we come from. I'm just going to get off for a second. Go ahead, Christina.
Thank you so much. We'll just pause for a moment right here to honor and respect what's just been shared. Thank you so much, Dawn, and for bringing your family into this knowledge sharing event and the opportunity for nurses to hear firsthand the experience of Indigenous nurses and artists and community members and family members. Goosebumps, yeah. So we'll move on to the next slide, which is shifting gears. So the next question on your Mentimeter invites you to think about the 3 Ds. And so I ask you, what are Indigenous specific stereotypes associated with delirium, dementia, and depression? And you can go ahead and answer the Mentimeter question there. Oh, is it not in there? Okay, maybe let's go back then. All right, so maybe just think about, as there's no Menti for right now, Indigenous specific stereotypes associated with delirium, dementia, and depression. And then we'll flip to the next slide to talk about the 4th D then. Back one. So the question is this: if we're to talk about the 4th D, what is the most common and deadly Indigenous specific stereotype faced by our families and our communities? I want you to think for a moment as you're answering before we look at what's happening on the Mentimeter screen. We've looked at delirium, dementia, and depression. What is that 4th D most commonly associated with Indigenous racism in nursing? We can go to the next slide. So I'm seeing a lot of drugs and drinking, drug users, addictions and alcoholism, discrimination. Next slide, please. Pause for a moment and take a breath. It's pretty heavy to think about. As you imagine for a moment right now, wherever you are, whoever you are, imagine for a moment living in a country where hospitals refuse to treat your father for a stroke because the doctors and nurses assumed he was drunk. Next slide. Imagine living in a community where nurses at the health center refused to treat your child because they assumed that she was on drugs. Next slide. Take another breath and imagine that you are the nurse on duty, bearing witness to these events. What would you do? And perhaps the more appropriate question, what would you do, kind of makes it a bit farther away from us. What will you do? Next slide, please. There's some words coming on there. Thank you. Next slide. So we have plenty of evidence of racism in nursing. Historically, the racially segregated Indian hospitals. More recently, evidence of people in long-term care and emergency rooms in communities dying and suffering while nurses bear witness. This picture is of Brian Sinclair with the number 34 that reminds us of the 34 hours in which he sat of a treatable illness in a emergency room where he died. Next slide, please. We remember all our family and community members who never made it home. If you're working with nurses who are First Nations, Inuit and Métis, please understand that this is not a one-off. This is not a sensational story. This represents our lived experience and the experience of our families and communities who never made it home. Yesterday, and we'll just stay here for a moment. Yesterday, the Canadian Medical Association recognized the 5-year anniversary of Joyce Echaquan's death. She was a 37-year-old First Nations woman who not only was denied care, but was treated abhorrently with racism, sexism, and even more so, the hate, the abuse, and other words you can think of beyond just racism about the neglectful and treatment that she received. From what I understand, if you're Francophone and you speak French, you may get a deeper chill for what exactly those words were that she live streamed on Facebook hours before her death. On September 18th, 2024, the Canadian Medical Association apologized for its role and the role of the medical profession in harms to Indigenous peoples in the healthcare system. Sharing what the apology means to Indigenous physicians and why it matters, Dr. Horn, a Mohawk family physician, said, "Our people have been telling stories of their interactions with the medical system in Canada with increasing urgency and have been violently gaslit." Next slide, please. So I ask again, not only what would you do, but what will you do? It's been 3.5 hours, this knowledge sharing event with brilliant First Nations, Inuit and Métis nurses, healthcare providers, elders, healers, sharing their stories, sharing their knowledge. I ask, what does "it starts with me" really mean? Anti-racism in nursing isn't only a policy or a workshop or a knowledge-sharing event and a one-off. Anti-racism in nursing isn't just merely something in writing. It's about relationships and obligations, taking individual action and responsibility within systems. We can't dismantle what we don't recognize. It starts with me, and it starts with you also, noticing how racism shows up in our own thinking, in my own thinking, in my own language, in my own practice. Next slide, please. And so here's an opportunity to pause for reflection. The difference between reflection and reflexivity is you get a chance to flex that muscle of thinking. And so what does it starts with me really mean? And if you don't have an answer right now, this is all right. This is something that hopefully will continue on as a forever conversation. Thank you very much for those who have participated. Next slide, please. So as Monica shared, the First Nations Health Authority in 2016 has this really great infographic made on leading a framework for cultural safety. And you'll see right in the center of it, it starts with me. And I would ask you to look at this a little bit closer. If you're watching the recording later, maybe pause for a moment. What jumps out at you? And what action do you believe you're able to do in this time? Racism in Indigenous health, it's about pathologizing the colonialism and the racism and not the people. Goes back to the original intentions of cultural safety in nursing education, not to blame the victims of their circumstances, recognizing the participation of nurses in the legacy of colonization and working together to redress and have truth before reconciliation. I'm going to pass over to Dawn to share a bit about the next slide.
So tomorrow is Orange Shirt Day, and many of you will hopefully see and wear an orange shirt on the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. This symbol unites Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to honor survivors and the victims of Canada's residential school system. It also calls attention to the lasting impacts this system still has on Indigenous people today. So I want to take a moment to share my thoughts as we approach tomorrow. So our leaders have chosen the orange shirt as a national symbol, just as the poppy has become a symbol of Remembrance Day for veterans such as myself. We all attend a ceremony on November 11. Most Canadians know the poem In Flanders Field by heart. We wear poppies without hesitation. We stand together and we honor veterans and the lasting impacts that they have suffered for the country. And that is how I feel about Orange Shirt Day. This is a day for all Canadians to acknowledge the painful truth of our history. And yet some still deny it. Some still don't fully understand what this day is or why it matters. The orange shirt represents stripping away of a culture, freedom, and identity that Indigenous children experienced, and the intergenerational trauma that continues today. As healthcare professionals and those who mentor others, we have a responsibility to be trauma-informed and culturally safe. Cultural safety requires us to understand the past so we could respond meaningfully to the present. So I want to encourage all of you to use tomorrow as a day of education and action. Attend an event, learn something new. Think about how you can be a part of reconciliation today and in the future. So there's events happening all across the country with many wearing orange shirts. I invite you to join one nearby. Reflect, listen, and honor who we are and where we come from. Thank you. And the next slide. So this is a photo. So it has been 10 years since 2015's Truth and Reconciliation calls to action were released. So in this photo, you see a striking image of Indigenous nurses from across Turtle Island standing in a silent protest of the exclusion of Indigenous people in the 2023 International Council of Nurses in Montreal, hosted by CNA. We felt invisible in this space. And so we wanted to rise and show other countries, Canadian Indigenous nurses.
Next slide. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples affirms the right to health and self-determination. In Canada, implementing UNDRIP alongside TRC calls to action is not optional. It's a human rights obligation. We must co-create and generate knowledge from the lived and living experiences of Indigenous peoples, Indigenous nurses, Indigenous family members, and communities across Canada and also globally. Next slide, please. In 2025, I was given a really special opportunity to travel to Helsinki, Finland, by my mentors, Dr. Mona Lisa Burke-Bearskin, Dr. Holly Graham, and Dr. Wanda Phillips-Beck, the three Indigenous health nursing research chairs in Western Canada, as well as with the support of Amélie Blanchon-Garneau, Margot Latimer, and Jason Hickey in the East, who are not Indigenous, but working with Indigenous nurses to uphold and elevate First Nations, Inuit, and Métis nursing and research. Alongside my colleagues, Michelle Padley, Nikki Rose, Hunter Porter, and José Lavallee, I got to speak about the impact of the Indigenous health nursing research chairs. It was a full circle moment. I had just defended my PhD thesis, dissertation in nursing, and there we are at this place. And what struck me immediately upon arrival was the lack of local Indigenous visibility and representation at ICN. This absence was really telling. It raised questions about whose voices are centered, even in global health forums. I began to ask myself, on a global scale, to what extent are nurses called to engage in the uncomfortable work of acknowledging the devastation caused by colonization? And how are we as a profession held accountable for the praxis, the implementation of anti-racism as part of cultural safety and cultural humility? This is precisely what the TRC calls to action and UNDRIP are asking of us as nurses, not symbolic gestures, not just an orange shirt, but concrete change. They call on us to name colonization as a root determinant of health and oftentimes life and death. To ensure Indigenous leadership and knowledge are woven into our systems. On the last day of the Congress in Helsinki, Sami physician Dr. Heidi Eriksson spoke about the impact of colonization on Sami peoples. And Sami nurse Dr. Nina Siversten, who currently lives and works in Australia, shared the following photo during her presentation. I'd like to note that Nina was the only Sami nurse that I met in Helsinki, Finland during the ICN. If we could go to the next slide. Their words and images brought home how colonization is not a historic event, but a living reality, and how Indigenous nurse solidarity transcends borders to create change. And this is the strength that we find together. This is the strength that we co-create. And everyone is invited to join in this work of anti-racism, anti-colonialism, which will remain activism in nursing until they become the standard. So we have a new code of ethics put out by the Canadian Nurses Association. And in that code of ethics, truth, reconciliation, and anti-racism are identified as core values in nursing alongside well-being. Next slide, please. So lest we forget, as nurses, we hold a responsibility to remember and to act. And so we invite each of you as colleagues, educators, leaders, and friends to observe, respect, and honor National Day for Truth and Reconciliation tomorrow on September 30th, as well as Indigenous Veterans Day on November 8th. These days are more than moments on a calendar. They are opportunities to pause, learn, and reflect on the truths of our shared history, the service of Indigenous veterans, and the ongoing work of reconciliation. Next slide. As we honor and remember, we also celebrate the strength, resilience, and leadership of Indigenous peoples, and warmly invite you to join in celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st during the summer solstice. Next slide, please. And Indigenous Nurses Day on April 10th. These days uplift Indigenous voices, leadership, knowledge, governance, and wellness, and to recognize the incredible contributions of Indigenous nurses, both in Canada and around the world. So if we can use these days to learn, share, and stand together in solidarity, ensuring Indigenous health and rights remain at the heart of nursing practice, we recognize and honor the first Indigenous nurse in Canada, Edith Anderson Montour, born on April 10th in 1890. And just to share, I know we're short on time, but her story is amazing. She had to go to the US to train, and she graduated at the top of her class in 1914 because Canadian nursing schools would not allow her based on racism and discrimination of the Indian Act. She served as a veteran in World War I, and due to the Military Voters Act of 1917, she became the first First Nations woman to vote as an Indigenous veteran in Canada. Then in 1960, when Indigenous peoples first gained the right to vote in Canada following amendments to the Indian Act, her house served as a polling station. She passed away in 1996 at the age of 105, the same year that the last Indian hospital and residential schools officially closed in Canada. And so in the chat, I know Hillary and colleagues have been sharing a few things to look at. In 2016, the Canadian Indigenous Nurses Association with Dr. Lisa Burke-Bearskin and all of these matriarchs and grandmothers celebrated Indigenous nurses coming together for 45 years, recognizing. And since 2022, in BC and then across the country, we have been celebrating on the birthday of Edith Anderson Montour, April 10th, as Indigenous Nurses Day. So we invite you to join us. Final slide and closing reflection is just that beyond land acknowledgements, we have a responsibility to support Indigenous rights to self-determination and engage in in decolonizing work, rather, to advance equity and structural change. It's not about what you can do, but we really want to ask, what will you do with all of this knowledge? Masicho. And Dawn.
Well, Leo.
Thanks.
Thank you, Christina and Dawn, for an engaging, spiritual, powerful, inspiring, and reflective session. And thank you to the attendees for your meaningful participation. Your teaching shared during your session will be helpful tools and knowledge for all nurses to bring forward in their work. I really appreciated the reference to the CPR Racism Guide, CNA Code of Ethics, and for all of us to participate in the days of celebration and reflection and learning. I highly encourage attendees to explore these very helpful and practical resources and attend the events into the future. As the event comes to an end, we'd once again like to thank our sponsors, the College of Registered Nurses of Saskatchewan, the British Columbia College of Nurses and Midwives, the Canadian Association for Rural and Remote Nursing, and TD Insurance for your much appreciated support. We'd like to give a huge acknowledgement to our event planning steering committee. We cannot thank you enough for your valuable time, contributions, and guidance in the planning and delivery of this event. As a non-Indigenous organization on its journey to reconciliation, we humbly request your continued guidance and insights. Again, we offer a wholehearted thank you to Jody Prince, Dr. Jacqueline Cinch, Delia McDonald, Stephanie Tuurngaq, Marilee Nojicic, Jennifer Pitt, Catherine Tansky, Wanda Phillips-Beck, Lisa Techrobe, Deanne Shepard, Elder Albert D. Marshall, Brian Mollitz, Evan Asitola, Dr. Holly Graham, Dr. Lise Bork-Bearskin, and Elder Liz Fowler. And finally, I'd like to thank all of the attendees, and we are very grateful for your presence today. Tomorrow, on the 10th anniversary for the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, we kindly ask that you take the time to sit, think about your learnings from this event, and ask yourself, what is my personal and professional responsibility? As we all know, self-reflection is key to practicing cultural humility. Before I invite my colleague Marilee Nojicic back to provide some closing remarks, I'd like to remind all participants of the post-event evaluation survey that is now available by scanning this QR code. We appreciate any feedback and you have to offer as we learn and grow as an organization and plan to host future events. So we'll give you a moment to take a picture of the QR code. And over to you, Marilee.
Given the fact that we're in a time crunch here, and I know lots of people need to get going, thank you, everyone. Thank you for including us in your journey. I hope to see you again, and it's been an honor of mine to share this time with the Canadian Nurses Association. I'm grateful that we got to co-develop this with them, and looking forward to your continued engagement. Over to the Elder, please.
Thank you, Marilee, and just once again grateful for our partnership. And I'm now honored to invite Elder Darlene back to close off in a good way. Over to you, Elder Darlene.
Howdy. Well, we came together and had great conversation, great learning, and a connection with many, many people across Canada. And we give thanks to the Nursing Association for bringing this about, because it is an important day. And tomorrow, we've said before, it's the 10th anniversary of Truth and Reconciliation Day and Orange Shirt Day. So we will close whenever we open an event. We ask the ancestors and the grandfathers and grandmothers and spirit to be with us. And then when we finish, we close the event. So I'll get you to take a nice deep cleansing breath throughout your whole body again. Connect with yourself at a deeper level. And as you sit in your chair, maybe bowing your heads, we ask the Creator, the grandfathers, the grandmothers, and all of our ancestors who walk with us to come and help us close this beautiful meeting. As this beautiful day draws to a close, we give thanks for the knowledge shared, the stories heard, and the hearts that came together in a spirit of healing. We are grateful for the guidance you have offered us today on how to walk gently, yet firmly, in the direction of truth and reconciliation. Creator, we thank you for the sacred space created, a space where Indigenous voices were honored, and the work of change was embraced. As the winds shift and the sun begins to set, may they carry with them our renewed commitment to equity, to cultural safety, and to the well-being of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We ask that you watch over everyone as they return home. May the teachings of today stay with us to guide our actions, to shape our future for the next 7 generations. May our children grow strong, our elders be respected, and our communities walk forward proud and whole. Creator, hear our prayers. Creator, hear our prayers. Be with us still as we step into tomorrow. All my relations, Michelle, thank you.